Story 1.
I set up cameras throughout my house and discovered the heartbreaking truth about my wife's cheating. We got married, and just 4 days later, we began a new part of our lives on the East Coast of the USA. I worked as an engineer, and she got a job as a chemist. Looking back, the first 4 years of our marriage were pretty happy, if not perfect. Since we didn't have family or friends nearby, we spent most of our time together, creating some unforgettable memories. Trouble started when we decided to buy a townhouse, and I suggested starting a family, thinking it was the next step in our relationship. However, when I brought it up, things took a bad turn. We argued a lot, and my ex admitted she didn't have a problem with having kids, but she didn't want them with me. That hurt. She said having a child with me would tie her down completely, and she wasn't sure about spending her life with me. As we talked more, things got worse until my ex-wife told me she was no longer attracted to me. I asked if there was someone else, and to my dismay, she confessed to being strongly attracted to her boss. Turns out they had secretly liked each other for a while, and their relationship turned physical during work trips. When I returned from my trip, something was off with my wife. She seemed sorry and suggested we sell our house and move to a smaller town for a fresh start. I was confused since we just went through a rough patch, and now she wanted to relocate with me. It didn't make sense. Then she started talking about her mother cheating on her first husband during a trip to Mexico. She hinted at something, but I couldn't figure it out. I should have been alarmed when she admitted being attracted to her boss, especially since they traveled together for work. It was almost a confession of cheating on their recent trip, but I was young and naive, and the situation didn't register. Soon, things went out of control. She worked late, went away on weekends to the mountains, where I later found out her boss had a cabin, and even took a solo vacation to clear her mind. This was before cell phones, so I couldn't reach her. I remember losing my mind, not hearing from my wife for a week with no idea where she was. My thoughts raced, considering every scenario except the obvious one. She was with her lover on a week-long vacation. As time went on, I stayed by her side, doing my best to help. I covered the costs for her counseling, drove her to appointments, and waited in the car. I hoped therapy would make her see that she was treating me unfairly. However, during one session, the therapist suggested divorce might be the best option, and surprisingly, my wife seemed to agree. Despite this setback, I still held on to hope that we could figure things out and she'd become the loving partner she used to be. Her behavior became unpredictable, showing she was dealing with inner struggles. One moment she'd express love, and the next, she couldn't stand being near me. I noticed she constantly tried to start fights, giving various reasons for her unhappiness. She'd keep pushing until I got upset, then escalate the argument until I had to leave the house for some peace. This was her chance to call her lover, as shown by the phone records. When she asked for a divorce, it felt like my world fell apart. While our marriage had its challenges, divorce had never crossed my mind. You have to understand, I come from a deeply Catholic background, specifically Hispanic, and divorce was a taboo subject in my upbringing. During that time, I had to attend a 2-week training in another state. When I returned, she was gone, and so were half of our furniture and savings. I was left clueless about her whereabouts. With no internet or online support groups available, I had no one to turn to. Feeling alone and abandoned, I sank into a dark hole of depression. The drama and stress had taken a toll on me for the past 18 months, and I'd let myself go. I gained weight and didn't care about my physical or mental well-being. Looking back, I appeared as terrible as I felt. My ex disappeared without a trace, leaving me with no way to contact her, no return address, and no support from mutual friends she had deceived. In a matter of days, I was completely isolated. Somehow, I forced myself out of bed each morning and went to work, earning just enough to stay afloat. One morning, almost a year after my ex left me alone and broke, I woke up to see shadows moving slowly on the empty walls of my home. It felt like a scene from a horror movie, but the real horror was my life. I realized that if I didn't pull myself out of this despair soon, I would become nothing more than a shadow in the wall of an empty room. Back then, I felt like I was in a living nightmare. To give you an idea, 5 years before my ex left me, I had to undergo open heart surgery. Surgeons cut my chest open, spread my ribs, and wired my chest back together with 11 titanium wires. It took me 18 months to recover from that ordeal, but I would have rather gone through it all again than relive the experience of being betrayed and abandoned by my spouse. It was a really tough time, but somehow I found the strength to pull myself out of that deep well of despair and start rebuilding my life. I was determined to completely change who I was from the inside out. Despite facing many challenges, I still had a good job and a roof over my head, so I began focusing on my health and well-being. I started exercising regularly and lost an impressive 50 pounds. I got rid of my old clothes and got some stylish new ones. I even switched from glasses to contact lenses. On top of all that, I started running and trained for a marathon. But that's not all. I also got into rock climbing and joined a volleyball team. Gradually, I began living a life I could be proud of. Even though I may not be the most handsome guy, I started radiating an aura of confidence that people noticed. Women found me attractive, and soon enough, I was back in the dating scene. Looking back, I realized that my wife's betrayal turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me. It allowed me to discover my true self and become the man I was meant to be. After a couple of years living my new life, I found myself looking for a new companion. Fate had it that I found her in a friend from work, someone who had seen my decline and subsequent rise from the ashes. To say she was stunning would be an understatement. Even the guards in my building, who I had become good friends with, couldn't believe I was dating the babe of the building. After falling in love and getting married, my wife decided to quit her job and focus on raising our 4 children. With only one income on the expensive East Coast of the USA, luxury was out of the question. But my wife proved to be an excellent home manager and an even better mother. She was a force to be reckoned with, running triathlons and learning auto maintenance, woodworking, and carpentry while managing our family of 6. There was no household project she wouldn't tackle. Currently, we're building a camper van to explore the USA when I retire in December. And to top it all off, we're eagerly awaiting the arrival of our first grandchild this winter. My wife taught me the real meaning of a strong, independent woman, and my life has been better for it. We never know what the future will bring, so we just have to stay positive and trust that good people are out there looking for us too. Betrayal doesn't have to define us, especially if there's no chance for reconciliation. Even if a relationship doesn't work out, it doesn't mean the end of the road. You might be curious about what happened to the ex. Well, a few years after she left, I heard through the grapevine that her boss divorced his wife, and soon after, they became a couple and eventually got married. Funny how things work out, isn't it? Fast forward to around 15 years ago, out of nowhere, she managed to track down my number and give me a call. She wanted to let me know that a mutual friend had passed away. We chatted for a bit, and I couldn't help but ask how she was doing. Her response was a bit cryptic, something like, living with the consequences of her past mistakes. I replied with a nonchalant, "It's all water under the bridge," and promptly hung up. To be honest, I'm grateful to my ex-wife for bringing me and my current wife together. It's strange how life works sometimes, isn't it? One decision can change everything. And here's another thing. My unsuccessful marriage steered me toward a new path in life. Over the past 15 years, I've been leading a ministry at my parish, assisting those going through divorces and separations. As a Catholic permanent deacon, I've worked with numerous individuals, guiding them to find peace and hope for the future. You could say that my ex-wife's unwillingness to reconcile with me has directed me toward a more significant purpose. Now, let's address a few questions you might have while hearing my story. Did she ever apologize? No, she never said sorry. She didn't even bid farewell. It was as if the years we spent together, from being best friends in college to dating and getting married, meant nothing to her. Did you ever talk to her? We owned a townhouse, and since she contributed to the mortgage, we had to communicate. She developed an odd system of phone calls through friends for me to reach her, and then she would call me back only if she thought communication was necessary. We only spoke a few times. Have you ever laid eyes on her again? I saw her 3 times after she left me, the last time being the day our divorce was finalized. A couple of years after her betrayal, she looked disheveled, dressed like a hippie, without makeup. Meanwhile, I had lost 50 lbs and was hitting the gym hard. Due to my weight loss, all my clothes were tailored, making me look sharp in my suit and tie. The last glance she gave me when the judge asked if I had any objections to the divorce agreement is forever etched in my mind. It was pure hatred. Her narcissistic mind couldn't handle the fact that I had thrived without her negative influence in my life. Second story recently, I've been suspecting my wife's faithfulness. But it's tricky. Without solid proof to support my gut feeling, I'm hesitant to confront her or bring up the topic, fearing unnecessary drama or giving her a chance to cover her tracks if she's guilty. It's a tough decision, and I'm uncertain about my next move. In recent months, something seems off with my wife. Small things don't add up. About 4 months ago, she started hitting the gym and paying more attention to her appearance. She's always been beautiful, but she never cared much for makeup or hairstyling. Now, she's always dressed up. Another concern is how protective she is of her phone. While it's normal for us to go through each other's phones, hers is always with her. If I need to use it for something innocent, like taking a picture, she tells me to use my own phone. Additionally, she's been working late and traveling more for her job. Something just doesn't feel right. Over the past 4 months, my wife hasn't shown interest in being close with me. Quick, meaningless kisses are all I get. I've tried initiating physical contact, but she's turned me down, and when she does give in, she just lies there unresponsive. It leaves me feeling worse than a direct rejection. When I brought up the lack of closeness before, she blamed it on tiredness from being a mom, work, and lifting weights. She promised to try harder and even kissed me later that night, but nothing has changed since then. I've been trying to figure out what's going on with my wife lately. Could it be a midlife crisis or maybe something else? It's hard to pinpoint, but there's a guy at her workplace that caught my attention. She used to talk about him all the time, but suddenly stopped a few months back. Despite this, I know they still work closely together. Apparently, he's married with kids and has been confiding in my wife about his own marital issues. I've briefly met him a few times, but he didn't seem interested in getting to know me. It's got me thinking that he could be trouble. I hate to admit it, but I've been comparing myself to this guy at my wife's work. He's not as good, looking as me, and definitely not in the same physical shape. Not to brag, but it's true. I'm big and strong, while he's average and a little overweight. But he dresses sharply, is outgoing, and enjoys a drink. Something my wife has mentioned a few times that she wishes I would do more often. He has a master's degree, while I only graduated from high school. And to top it off, he makes more money than I do. As a trainer for fighters, I earn a modest income, but my passion for the job is invaluable. On the flip side, there's this guy who's wealthy and enjoys flaunting his riches. I don't usually compare myself to others, but in this situation, the contrasts between us are glaring. What's been bothering me is my wife's recent business trip to a tropical resort. Initially, I thought many CO workers would be there, but it turns out it was just her, the flashy guy, and the CEO. The CEO isn't a concern due to age, but the other guy is a different story. My gut tells me something happened between them during that week, and not knowing for sure is driving me crazy. My inner detective senses something is off in my marriage, but I'm cautious not to jump to conclusions and worsen things by confronting her. While our marriage has had its challenges, overall it's been decent. Nothing major has occurred to make me question her loyalty. However, my wife and I have different personalities. I'm not the most social person, and I don't make a lot of money, which frustrates her. She believes I should be pursuing a more lucrative career, but my passion lies in fighting and training fighters, something I've known my whole life. I could consider becoming a personal trainer, but these paths don't lead to significant earnings. Apart from this, she seems content in our marriage. However, I can't shake the feeling that something is off, especially in her behavior towards me and this flashy guy at work. A friend suggested I play the spy and gather evidence to confirm my suspicions, but I'm uncomfortable violating my wife's privacy. If she is cheating, forgiveness might be challenging, but I hope my hunch is wrong. Lately, thoughts of infidelity have been creeping into my mind, and I can't shake them. The scariest part is we have 2 kids, and the idea of losing them terrifies me. I'm heavily invested in their lives, and the thought of only seeing them half the time breaks my heart. Any suggestions on how to approach this situation would be appreciated. Update: I got the login details for our cell phone account. My wife uses her phone a lot for work, and initially everything seemed normal when I checked it. However, as I sorted through the numbers and times, I noticed a large number of texts sent to a single number, often late at night, a few hours after we went to bed. I'm determined to find out who owns this number, and plan to somehow access my wife's phone to see whose name is saved under it. When I discovered this, my emotions got the best of me, and I started feeling angry. I tried convincing myself it was a mistake or some friend of hers, but last night, when I tried to get close to her, she turned me down again. She apologized, citing tiredness and a headache. I expressed my feeling that we weren't connecting well, and she apologized, promising to do better. However, she had made similar promises before without following through. Not wanting to push further, I just said goodnight and went to bed. This morning, she casually mentioned thinking about a trip to Vegas with some college girlfriends. Despite not being into gambling, it struck me as odd. I asked about her companions, and she named a few girls I had never met. It might all be a coincidence, but I can't shake this feeling that something is off. Further update recapping, I've had serious suspicions about my wife having an affair, so I decided to snoop around and found something interesting. Detailed cell phone records revealed countless late, night texts to one specific number, hundreds of them. Taking a chance, I called the number from a payphone, and it turned out to be one of her CO workers, the same one I suspected. I had a sneaky feeling this guy might be trouble. But wait, it gets worse. I got her phone while she was in the shower, and guess what? The entire text conversation with this guy had been deleted. To make matters more incriminating, the number I called earlier was saved in her phone under a female name. Yes, she was trying to be sneaky about it. Now, my mind is filled with worries about all those out-of-town trips she took with this guy. Something is definitely not right here, and I'm starting to fear the worst. After discovering evidence of my wife's potential infidelity, I had to leave the house to clear my head. Despite my best efforts, I'm not sure what to do next. If I confront her now, she may come up with some excuse or lie. Should I wait and gather more evidence before approaching her? Or should I come clean immediately? I am seething with anger, and the thought of the other guy makes me want to lash out, but I know that won't solve anything. I fear that if I do confront her, she may only admit to minor flirtations. leaving me without enough proof of the bigger picture. I could really use some advice on how to proceed. I laid in wait like a lion stalking its prey, with a sneaky plan, pretending to be asleep, biding my time. After everyone was in bed and the house was silent, I kept one eye open, waiting for her to make a move. And sure enough, as the clock struck 12, my wife got out of bed and slinked into another room, quietly closing the door behind her. I waited a few minutes before getting up and slowly walking towards her. I caught her red-handed mid-text and stood over her before she could react. Her eyes widened in shock as she tried to hide her phone, but it was too late. I demanded to know who she was texting at this ungodly hour. She stammered and stuttered, trying to come up with a plausible excuse, but I wasn't buying it. She said it was just a girlfriend, but I knew there was more to it than that. I had her cornered, and she knew it. I couldn't believe what I had just done. My plan was risky, but it worked. I started kissing her and asked if she wanted to fool around. Just as I expected, she said she couldn't. I laughed and playfully teased her, saying that she must be more into the girlfriend she was texting than me. Then I started to tickle her, and we playfully wrestled. I managed to get the phone from her, and I could see the panic in her eyes. She tried to get it back, but I held it in the air like I was playing keep away. I laughed and acted like I was having fun the entire time, telling her that I was going to call this girlfriend and ask if she was into my wife. As my wife pleaded with me not to call her friend, a sense of satisfaction overcame me. I walked away, pretending to end the conversation while secretly checking the text messages on her phone. One message caught my eye saying, "Can't wait to see you tomorrow." My heart raced as I hit the call button, waiting for a response. A man's voice came through the speaker, and I hung up, unsure of what to say. Turning to my wife, I began reading the messages aloud. I could see fear in her eyes as I asked if the recipient was a guy or her friend. She stayed silent. Continuing, I demanded an explanation for the late-night texts to this guy. She stuttered, claiming she didn't know. I pressed on, asking if there was anything she needed to tell me. She couldn't speak, and that's when I dropped the bomb. Calmly, I said, "I know everything. I know when you wake up to text him, and I know who he is." Tears streamed down her face as she apologized, but I remained composed. I issued a stern warning about the crucial moments ahead, urging her to come clean. My wife finally confessed to flirting with her coworker, dealing with marital troubles, and it had escalated beyond casual chit-chat. She insisted they never did anything physical, but I wondered if she was telling the whole truth. I gave her an ultimatum: confess everything or leave. She cried and apologized, admitting to flirting with her coworker, who also faced marital issues, but I doubted she was telling me the whole truth. I told her we'd discuss things later, and she needed to pack a bag and leave for her mom's house. As she left, she asked if I would leave her. I didn't give her a direct answer and said we would talk later. However, she kept blowing up my phone, so I turned it off to get some space. Deciding to seek a marriage counselor, I pretended to want reconciliation to avoid suspicion. Last night's confrontation wasn't impulsive. I had a plan. While playfully wrestling and tickling her, I recorded the entire thing on my phone, just in case she falsely accused me of something later. I checked with a friend to ensure it was legal in our state, and he confirmed it was. Despite thinking she wouldn't do that, I can't be too careful given the circumstances. I'm a big guy, 6'4" and 240 pounds of muscle. I used to be a fighter, now training fighters. If there's any false accusation, I know the odds are against me. I could get arrested and lose everything, including my kids. That's why I keep recording everything as an insurance policy. My world has shattered into a million pieces. My family, my everything, has been destroyed. I'll miss out on 50% of my children's childhood. Despite sensing something was wrong, the reality blindsided me. The worst part, this is just the beginning of the pain. I want to confront the other guy, but I know I need to hold back. I heard through the grapevine that he found me terrifying when he first laid eyes on me, so I'd like to give him a good scare. And to top it all off, in one of the texts my wife and he shared, he referred to me as the animal after she made a jab at my intelligence. I may not have a college degree or make much money, but I'm not stupid. I love learning and reading books on all sorts of topics. But in this moment, I'm feeling anything but smart. For now, I'm just trying to make sense of this devastation. Update: my friend, who's an attorney, connected me with a family law specialist. The positive part is this attorney understands what it's like to be cheated on, having been in my shoes. My friend mentioned he's eager to help and won't charge me excessively. It's a good development amid the chaos. On the other hand, my wife came clean about having an affair. She started with the excuse of just flirting, but I didn't buy it. Eventually, she confessed it turned physical, lasting longer than I thought. She shared all the steamy details, and I'm honestly unsure how to feel about it. My head is spinning and I can't focus. The emotional roller coaster is too much. I had a serious talk with my wife, suggesting it's best for her to stay with her mom for now. Being around her became unbearable. I needed space, and so did our kids. They deserved normalcy, and I decided to take care of them. My attorney mentioned that staying in the house is a significant advantage in this situation. Although I decided our marriage was over, I kept it to myself. She'll find out when the papers are served. My mind is a mess, constantly replaying thoughts of my wife with this guy. Trying to stay focused on coaching fighters in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu helps a bit, but my mind often wanders. Physical exertion helps clear my head a little, but it's not a permanent fix. My kids have been my saving grace, and I focus all my attention and affection on them. Beyond BJJ and my children, I love learning and reading about new topics. Unfortunately, I can't concentrate on a paragraph without losing my train of thought. The text calling me a stupid animal makes me wonder what else was said. It feels like I'm trapped in a nightmare, and the happy-go-lucky me feels like a distant memory. As news of my situation spread, many people offered support, which is comforting. Surprisingly, some friends' wives offered to set me up with some beautiful women they know, some of whom seem interested. But as tempting as it may be, I have no intention of dating until this is all behind me, and even then, it might take a while. Right now, my focus is solely on my kids, ensuring they have stability during this tough time. My heart is shattered, and my kids bear the brunt of the fallout. Being a single dad wasn't something I ever envisioned, but here I am. Meanwhile, my wife seems to be spiraling into a dark abyss. The guy she cheated on me with apparently bailed on her, and she's been drowning her sorrows in drinks, going out with men she meets online. She's been reaching out to me, sobbing and begging me to take her back, saying she wants her old life back. It's tempting, but I know I can't let her back into my life. It seems she's turned her anger towards me once she learned how much she'll have to pay in monthly support. At least that means I can get some peace from her constant calls. My kids don't get it. I feel miserable every second they're not with me. I'm lonely all the time, spending most of my time at home. The girl at the coffee shop noticed I looked sad and asked if everything was okay. I guess I'm not hiding it well. People want to set me up, but I feel branded as the guy whose wife cheated, so I'm not interested. It's been so long, I have no idea how to date. The success of a few fighters on a public stage has been the only spark I felt in a long time. I'm not sure what I'll do next, and I need to snap out of it at some point, but I lack the motivation. I decided to take matters into my own hands and expose the other guy. With proof of the affair, I contacted his wife and presented the evidence. I couldn't sit back and let him get away with it. Initially, she didn't believe me, but later I heard there were significant problems in their marriage. They might still be together, but their relationship is hanging by a thread. I'm struggling with intense feelings of anger and frustration over the situation. Life is full of surprises. I never thought I'd be in this situation, but here I am. On a positive note, there's a girl I met through friends, and I can't stop thinking about her. She's gorgeous, but she's also about 14 years younger than me. The age gap seems significant, and my confidence is low, but I can't stop thinking about her. I haven't asked her out yet. The last 6 months have been an emotional roller coaster. I never expected such profound sadness. My usual happy-go-lucky personality has been replaced by a dark and melancholic one. After the terrible experience, I took some time for myself. During that time, the beautiful younger woman I was interested in got a long-term job assignment in Europe. Even though she was miles away, we kept in touch through technology. When her assignment was over, she returned, and we've been together ever since. She adores me and my kids and has a heart of gold. Before we met, I heard about this incredible woman who looked like Wonder Woman and was the kindest person you could ever imagine. I thought it was too good to be true, but she's everything and more. I believe we're ready to take the next steps in our relationship soon. My ex-wife's life has taken a turn for the worst since our divorce. She started drinking heavily, hooking up with random guys online, and took on more work, which took a toll on her. The last time I saw her, she looked like she had aged 15 years, as if her life force had been drained from her. Her best friend told me she's become a miserable person to be around. I still can't understand how someone who seemed to have everything under control could spiral into such a dark place. Her friend also confided in me that my ex-wife never expected me to leave her after the affair. I believe she thought she had control over me because of her high income. It's sad to see the consequences of her actions, but I hope she finds peace for the sake of our kids. Life is pretty good now, despite ongoing pandemic struggles. Looking back, I'm glad I didn't drag out my first marriage. Ending it was a tough call, but it was the right one. After that, it was just one step in front of the other. Every day, I pushed a little further, even though it felt like I was wading through quicksand. I now know that when you're in that situation, you have to think long-term. You might feel like the world is ending, but there's always hope. The key is to keep moving forward, no matter how hard it gets. Trust me, it gets pretty damn hard, but every day, try to do something that adds to your skill set. Not just motivational self-help stuff, but real skills. For me, I started making short films of my fighters and got into videography and editing. It's been a fun hobby, and I've learned a lot. I also read more books than ever before, trying to learn about all sorts of topics. Small things like these add up over time. You just have to keep at it and be patient with yourself.
Story 2.
Cheating wife regrets her affair as her AP went bankrupt and her husband became an alpha. Hey there, I'm Jack. Life was pretty darn good, successful, married to a stunning lady named Miranda. But you know how these stories go, right? Hold on to your hats. My beautiful wife Miranda was a few years younger than me, clocking in at 47 but looking like a solid 35. She had this personality that could melt glaciers. Seriously, I've never met anyone as charming as her. She always knew how to say the right things, a real silver tongue charmer. Conversation flowed like a river when she was around. To me, her personality was worth its weight in gold. Now, let's talk about her job. She had a degree and was a certified public accountant CPA, heading the accounting department at a massive downtown hospital. We're talking billions of dollars flowing through her office every year. The responsibility on her shoulders was staggering, and that meant late nights at work were par for the course. I got it, you know? It came with the territory, and I never once gave her grief about it. Supportive partner, that's me. Funny thing is, we met back in college. She was just starting out, and I was there grabbing a couple of courses to snag my real estate license. Love? Yep, it hit me like a freight train. But I never pried into her life before we crossed paths. It wasn't important. We dated exclusively for nearly a year, and then bam, a ring and a marriage proposal changed everything. So Miranda and I tied the knot in a beautiful wedding and had an epic honeymoon. Life was peachy. But when we got back from our honeymoon, Miranda had big plans for her degree. Sure, it took a bit longer to graduate, thanks to the arrival of our 2 incredible kids. Meanwhile, I was raking in the dough, and we even hired a nanny to help Miranda finish her degree. She did just that and got snapped up by a major accounting firm in Dallas right away. Our trusty nanny stuck around until the kiddos hit school age. She busted her tail and kept climbing the career ladder, headhunted by another accounting firm, then poached by the hospital. It felt like she was getting promoted every other year until she became the big boss in the accounting department. That was a good 5 years back, and she's been loving it since. Now, I'm a licensed real estate broker specializing in commercial properties, juggling 4 different agencies. I've always got a nice stash of listings, not just in Dallas, but also in Oklahoma City and Little Rock. My job takes me on the road quite a bit between these cities. Our kids, Leo and Zara, are something else. Leo's already got his college degree and is working out in San Francisco. Zara, well, she's still hitting the books here in Dallas and planning a June wedding right after she wraps up her degree in May. I've got high hopes she'll join me in the business after tying the knot. Zara's got a bunch of her mom's traits, and those skills are worth their weight in gold. She's going to do great. Back to a year ago in Starbucks. I'm sitting in Starbucks, as I usually do, trying to get in touch with Miranda. Every day around 4:30, I'd give her a call to see when she'd be heading home and to chat about dinner plans, going out, grabbing some takeout, or cooking up something at home. You see, Fridays were sacred to us. We'd been married for a solid 25 years, and I could count on one hand the times we didn't go out on a Friday night. Even if work was hectic, we'd wrap things up and hit the town. We were the type who kept our work at the office, although every now and then we had to head back on the weekend to tie up loose ends. But Friday night was our time to unwind. Update, I got to Starbucks a tad early to pester Miranda about dinner, so I decided to kick back with a cup of coffee first. Across the street was the hospital, and to my left was this big parking garage. Now, that garage had a pedestrian bridge that stretched high above the road, linking it to the hospital. There were 5 exits from the garage, and 2 lanes on the road were reserved exclusively for people coming out of the garage. I wasn't paying much attention, but I did happen to notice a hefty Chrysler 300 rolling out of the garage. It came to a stop at a traffic light right in front of Starbucks. What caught my attention was that Miranda was in the passenger seat. Now that was strange because she'd always keep me in the loop about any meetings outside the hospital. I was in Starbucks, and I needed answers. With my phone in hand, I called up Miranda's office, hoping to get some clarity. But what I heard was a shocker. They told me she had wrapped up her work for the day. Confusion swirled in my mind, so I decided to bypass the office and dial Miranda's number directly. After 3 rings, she answered, and I couldn't help but blurt out, "Miranda, where are you?" Her response? "I'm in my office, swamped with this crucial report that needs wrapping up." Here's where it gets interesting. I was at Starbucks with big plans, ready to celebrate a significant sale and whisk Miranda off to our favorite Austin restaurant. I even had thoughts of us spending the night there, but all she could muster was, "I can't tonight, but can I get a rain check?" Then came the kicker. Are you in Starbucks across from the hospital? I thought you were in Oklahoma City. I confirmed I was indeed at Starbucks, and no travel had been on my agenda. The burning question in my mind, did she realize I'd seen her? I tried to extend an olive branch, offering to bring her coffee and a salad to fuel her through that report. She mumbled something I couldn't quite catch, then mentioned one of her colleagues had left her a sandwich and a soft drink. Miranda added, "Pick something up on the way home for yourself, and I'll be there as soon as I can." Curiosity getting the best of me, I checked my phone's location app. Seeing their car had now parked at a famous address I knew all too well, the Hilton Hotel. "Are you in your office now?" I asked. "Yes," came her response. I decided to give her some space and said, "I'll see you at home. If you don't want my company, I can get the work finished quicker on my own." With a resigned, "Okay, see you later," I hung up. Miranda and I had what felt like a fairy tale life, basking in financial comfort. We drove fancy cars, all courtesy of yours truly. Our home was a sprawling ranch on 5 pristine acres, meticulously landscaped. It resembled a park more than a residence. When not at work, we were inseparable. To an outside observer, it was evident that we were deeply in love and fully committed to each other. Miranda made sure to dance with me exclusively at social events, even if I said it was okay for her to dance with other men. Her response was always that she didn't want another man's hands on her. She never gave me a reason to feel jealous. I never once entertained the thought of Miranda being unfaithful. It never crossed my mind. I believed our bed life was fantastic. I was wholeheartedly devoted to her, and she was well aware of my stance on infidelity. I sympathized with Miranda, but she seemed content and happy. I couldn't have imagined that if she wasn't satisfied at home, she would seek satisfaction elsewhere. I sat there for several minutes, feeling emotionally devastated. It was as if my entire world had crumbled around me. Several people asked if I was okay. Eventually, I just stood up and drove home. I was sitting alone in the dark when Miranda returned home. She asked, "Why are you sitting in the dark?" "I've had a terrible day, and I'm upset," I replied. "Okay, what's your next question?" We never snapped at each other, but I felt justified in my inquiry. "You mentioned earlier that you were excited about closing a significant sale, so why are you upset now?" she replied. "Because I've recently learned some very disturbing news." I inquired, "What could be so terrible?" She responded, "If you don't know, then you've got no reason to ask." I stood up and poured myself a large brandy, then took it into the den and sat down. I skipped dinner, so the brandy hit me quickly. I remained in the den for about 30 minutes before getting up and heading to the guest bedroom to sleep. I spent the night tossing and turning, unable to shake the impact of what she had done to our marriage. And then I wondered if this might not have been the first time. How long had she been deceiving me? One thing was certain, I wouldn't tolerate being made a fool of. Eventually, I rose from a troubled night of little sleep. After a quick shower, I stumbled into the kitchen in search of coffee. Miranda was seated at the table and spoke first. She said, "Good morning. How did you sleep in the spare bedroom?" "Terribly, to be honest. I don't think I even got an hour of sleep." "Can you tell me, what's bothering you so much?" I looked at her, utterly baffled by her question, before responding, "Miranda, is there something you want to talk about?" "What do you mean? Are you upset because I had to work on a Friday night and we couldn't go out to dinner?" When did work become more important than family? We've always dropped everything on Friday nights and enjoyed a night out. Maybe work has become more enjoyable than spending time with me. "Who is he?" She gave me a confused look and clearly didn't want to answer. She grew restless, got up, and started a new pot of coffee, trying to avoid the question. I continued, "I saw you. I even called your office and they said you had left for the day. I know you went to the Hilton. Game over. How could you do this to us, to me, to our family? I thought we meant more to each other than some cheap affair. I'm sorry. I never intended for this to happen. I've been fighting it for over a year, and in the end, I was weak. My body responded, and I got lost. His name is David Alexander, my boss. We tried to be discreet so you wouldn't find out. I am so deeply sorry. First of all, you're well aware of my stance on infidelity. Our marriage is over. I have never been so hurt in my life. I've been betrayed by my best friend, my lover, my soulmate, my wife. We've always shared everything. Never in my wildest dreams did I think this would ever happen. At this point, I'm not even sure if I want to continue living. If we didn't have children, I know what path I would choose." Update: Miranda was crying hard at this point. She could see the pain I was in, but I didn't want her pity. Finally, she regained some control and asked, "Is there anything I can do to repair our marriage?" The simple answer is no, but right now I'm not thinking clearly. And I can't make a decision about this. However, There might be some steps you can take to regain your self-respect. First and foremost, the affair has to end immediately. You need to file a physical offense case against your lover because it seems like he took advantage of you. Both of you might lose your jobs because of that, but it's the right thing to do. Finally, you should quit your job and then file a lawsuit against the hospital. You're a CPA, and finding a good job shouldn't be a problem. She paused for a moment and said, I'm not sure if I can agree to all of that. I got up to leave the kitchen. Where are you going? I'm leaving. I'll let you know where I'm staying tomorrow. I'll consult with a lawyer, and I'll try to make this as painless as possible. However, both you and your lover will not come out of this unscathed. You can mark my words on that. I won't be a fool. I'll call the kids this afternoon and let them know their mother cheated. Please leave the kids out of this. Aren't they a part of this family too? Yes, but I don't want them to be hurt by this. It's a little too late to worry about that. They are adults and need to know you're just worried about your reputation. With that said, I packed 2 suitcases, gathered my business items, and loaded the car. When I returned to the kitchen, Miranda was still sitting at the table, crying. Miranda, do all the things I've asked, and if you want to talk, I'll be willing to sit down and discuss our marriage. I'll let you know where I'm staying. And with that, I was gone. I wondered if I would ever step foot in my house again. Our local Holiday Inn served a delicious breakfast, so that's where I ended up. I inquired about a weekly professional rate and made reservations for 2 weeks. I texted Miranda and informed her of my whereabouts. I questioned why I did it, but old habits are tough to break. The following day, which was Sunday, I spent the entire day in my room, lost in thought and wallowing in self-pity. I recognized the need to talk to my children, so I sent them a text message, urgently requesting to speak with them about some important yet unfortunate news. Both of them promptly replied, asking me to call immediately. I broke the heartbreaking news to them that their mother had cheated on me and had been involved in an ongoing affair for the past few months. They inquired about how I had discovered it, and I shared the details. They were devastated but assured me of their support. They had numerous questions, but I had few answers. I informed them that I had moved out and was staying at the Holiday Inn near our old house. Sadly, we bid each other goodbye. Miranda called within minutes. How could you turn our kids against me? I didn't turn our kids against you. Your actions have hurt our children, and that's what you're hearing. I told you I was going to tell them. I won't inform your friends or your parents. That's your responsibility. Be aware, though, that the truth has a way of surfacing eventually. I had just hung up the phone with her when there was a knock at the door. It was my daughter, Zara. She came in, and we held each other, both shedding tears. She understood my pain, and I was grateful to have someone to share it with. We talked for over an hour, and she wanted every detail, which, unfortunately, I didn't have much of. Finally, Zara mentioned that she was going to see her mother. About 2 hours later, I received a text from Zara urging me to talk to Mom because there was much more to the story than I knew. I replied with an okay. Somewhat reluctantly, I called Miranda. I know Zara has been to see you, and she asked me to call and talk. I promised her I would, so let's talk. What I'm going to say will hurt. Are you sure you want to hear it? Yes, you've told Zara, and she obviously thinks I need to hear it too, so let's hear it. So, she disclosed the entire story of her affair, albeit reluctantly at first, but she had been an active participant since then. The narrative was painful to hear. The good-looking guy is more than 10 years younger than Miranda and over 15 years younger than me. I was furious and determined to confront him for wrecking my marriage. While it was understandable why Miranda got involved with him, it didn't excuse the fact that she had cheated on me, not just once, but consistently for months. I couldn't get past that. My lawyer Sam is a personal friend, so I called him at home and explained the situation. He advised me to come to his office first thing the next day. Sam is a friend outside the office, but he's always professional in a business setting, and I knew he charged his clients, even friends, appropriately. I informed him of my intentions regarding Miranda, filing for divorce, serving her, and then waiting for the 90-day period. I wanted immediate legal action against her lover. I insisted on suing him for a physical offense and also pursuing a lawsuit against the hospital. I believe there should be some moral clauses in the hospital's policies, particularly when upper-level management takes advantage of subordinates. They should bear some responsibility. Even if the lawsuit didn't lead anywhere, it would at least generate unwanted publicity. I asked Sam if there was any way to discreetly inform this guy's wife today that her husband had been having an affair. Sam, the clever lawyer that he is, phoned David Alexander's home and spoke to the wife, posing as an accountant from the Hilton. He inquired about several credit card charges over the past 3 months and explained that there was a corporate rate that could save David a lot of money in the future. David's wife took about 10 seconds to grasp the situation. I'm sure she would be furious with him as well. An hour later, I received a phone call from Miranda. "Why have you already brought disgrace to David's family? Are you at work? Have you accepted any of my proposals?" I replied, "Yes, I'm at work, and I'm still considering your proposals." That was the wrong answer. I had already consulted with Sam, and I had asked him to delay the divorce paperwork until I saw your response. Now I know. I hope you have a great life. Without waiting for a response, I hung up the phone, feeling hollow. My last hope for some form of redemption had disappeared. Miranda wasn't willing to consider any of the options I had suggested. I called Sam and instructed him to serve Miranda and proceed with the divorce as swiftly as possible. I didn't want any delays. I went to the bank and divided our accounts. We had always shared a joint account where our paychecks went. We never separated our finances into his and hers. I divided everything evenly, opened a new account in my name only, and ordered new credit cards. I informed my workplace and had my accounts transferred to one of the other brokers. I also took 30 days of vacation. I needed a break to clear my head, so I decided to go to Jamaica. Update. Sam acted swiftly. The next day, Miranda was served and charged with adultery. David Alexander was sued, as was the hospital. I wasn't entirely sure if I had a valid case against Alexander or the hospital, but it provided some satisfaction. I didn't anticipate Miranda objecting or contesting the divorce. I informed everyone who needed to know that I would be away for the next 30 days. I wasn't certain if I would have access to email or cell phone signal. I purchased some beachwear and a good pair of running shoes and left abruptly. I felt like I was running away, but then I questioned what I was fleeing from, a cheating wife? Jamaica turned out to be enjoyable. I wanted to stay active, so I ran on the beach every morning. Initially, I could only manage short distances, but within 2 weeks I was running 3 miles. I shed excess weight and became a sun-kissed beachgoer, relishing every moment. I even looked into the real estate market and found that property was surprisingly affordable compared to the prices I had seen. I envisioned retiring at the early age of 53. Even after dividing our accounts, I still had a substantial amount of money with no outstanding bills. The family house would also bring in money when it was sold. After careful consideration, I put a deposit down on a 2-bedroom beachfront bungalow. It was conveniently close to shops, restaurants, and bars. This change allowed me to disconnect from the world, a welcome break for someone accustomed to constant stress. I knew I had to return to Dallas to handle the legal proceedings. I didn't hold high expectations for the lawsuits, but I needed to check in and see what was happening. Closing bank accounts, transferring money, and visiting my kids were on my agenda, especially since Zara's wedding was approaching. I reached out to Zara, and she picked up on the first ring. "Dad, it's so great to hear from you. Where have you been?" I replied, "I've become a beach bum, and that's my new calling. Anyway, I'm back for your wedding. Is everything going as planned?" Zara assured me, "Yes, it's still scheduled for a week from Saturday, and all is set." Mom has been a tremendous help since she quit her job. This caught my attention. "Mom quit," Zara explained. "Dad, she resigned that first Tuesday afternoon after you left. And she sued that guy and the hospital on Wednesday. If she could have found a suitable lawyer, she would have done it on Monday." I started to feel uneasy. "Why didn't she inform me?" Zara responded, "Dad, where have you been? Did you have cell phone or email access? She tried so many times to reach you, and we eventually gave up." I didn't really know how to reply. I began with, "No, there was no cell phone reception or email where I was. In fact, I've only just turned on my cell phone for the first time. I see there are numerous texts and emails waiting. Mom has also been seeing a counselor twice a week for the past month. She's made a sincere effort to regain her former self. I've spent most of my time with her. She's a wreck and desperately needs someone with her." I acknowledged her words but affirmed that my marriage with her mom was history. I'm not certain I can ever trust her again, especially since she had the best act ever with her lover. Why would she want to return to me when what I can offer is good for me but ordinary for her? Mom loves you, and I don't think the physical aspect is an issue anymore. I'll talk to your mom maybe today, but I'm not making any promises. I believe our marriage is beyond repair, but I assure you we'll be a couple for your wedding. I don't want anything to spoil my child's big day. After the phone call, I visited Sam's office to check on the progress of our legal actions. The divorce was proceeding, and the judge would finalize it within 30 days. The 2 other legal cases were more complicated. David Alexander had lost his job and had a divorce action pending against him as well. His life had taken a significant hit. The hospital was denying any responsibility. Sam mentioned that Miranda had cases against both of them, and he believed her chances were better than ours. I decided to drop our case against Alexander but keep the hospital case open to see how they would respond. The initial hearing was scheduled in 2 weeks. From Sam's office, I headed to my own. I informed the office manager about my retirement plans and that I wouldn't be returning. I wasn't wealthy, but living in Jamaica was affordable, and I could manage on a budget for quite some time. Plus, we still had the proceeds from selling our house. I needed to discuss this with Miranda because she was still living in the house. So, for the first time in several weeks, I found myself pulling up to my house. The last time I was here, I wasn't sure about returning. Miranda opened the front door before I could step out of the car. "Hello, Jack, you look fantastic and so tan. You've also lost weight." I replied, "Yes, the last 4 weeks have been good to me. My old clothes don't fit me anymore." We settled in the kitchen, and Miranda brewed a fresh pot of coffee. "We have a lot to discuss, and I'm not sure where to begin. You know our divorce will be finalized in 30 days. We'll need to divide the property, including the house. What would you like to do with the house?" Miranda replied, "I haven't really thought that far. I suppose we could sell it, although I hate to let it go. It's been our home since we got married. Would you like to buy my share and stay here?" "No, the house is too large for just one person, and it holds too many memories, mostly good ones. I can't stay here, so I guess we should list it." "Do you know any good real estate agents?" Miranda said, "I'm sure I can find a realtor, but I can't sell our home because I've just submitted my retirement paperwork. After Zara's wedding, I'm going back to Jamaica to live. I feel it. Home there with no cell phone or email connections. It's a completely disconnected life, and I love it. I've been able to exercise daily, eat well, and not only get fit, but also shed all the weight I've been trying to lose for so long. Those are my plans. What about yours?" "I don't have any plans. I'm just taking it day by day, trying to move past how I ruined our marriage. I'll be okay. I'll find an apartment near Zara and eventually return to work. I'm not rushing back, but someday I'll run out of my share of our money." "How can you afford to retire?" I explained, "Living in Jamaica is inexpensive. It's a simple life, and I don't need all the luxuries we have here. I can live there without touching my savings or selling stocks. I'll be fine. This house should sell for $1 million, so we'll have that to share too." "Have you seen Zara?" Miranda replied, "No, but I spoke to her on the phone for nearly an hour this morning, and I made her a promise that I hope you'll help me keep. I assured Zara that we would attend her wedding together. I want nothing to mar her special day." "Do you know when Leo's flying in for the wedding?" "He's arriving next Wednesday. And I had planned to meet him at DFW unless you'd like to. I thought it would be nice if he stayed here at the house. I'd like to accompany you to the airport to welcome Leo. It's been over a year since we've seen him, and maybe we should greet him together." "I'd appreciate that. This house is quite large. Would you like to stay here as well? It'd be nice to have everyone under one roof again, especially since we're hosting the reception here after the wedding. The big marquee will be set up on Monday, and the caterers have all the food and drinks ready." That's how it unfolded. Miranda and I seemed to reconnect, just like before the affair. We could talk without getting angry and communicated rationally. We worked together tirelessly to organize Zara's wedding, and having Leo there to help was a blessing. The night before her wedding, Zara stayed in the house with all of us. We sensed the tension, but having our family together one more time was very special. We all knew the house would be gone by next year, and there would be no more family gatherings in our old home. Zara's wedding went off without a hitch. She looked stunning, and I felt like I had lost my daughter. I knew her husband was a great match, but I secretly hoped he realized the real treasure was Zara. The place was adorned with fresh flowers, and champagne flowed all night. We had one of the top bands from Dallas, and the dancing continued into the early hours of Sunday. Miranda and I danced together for most of the night. I had pledged to Zara that we would attend as a couple, and I don't think we disappointed anyone. Miranda looked fantastic, and I shared many dances with her. I found my body responding to her just as it had in the past. I was a bit drunk and overwhelmed. I might regret this in the morning. Suddenly, Miranda said, "You know, Jack, if we share a bed tonight, we'll be sharing more than just the bed." "What's bothering you, Jack? Please do it one more time for old time's sake, please." "Miranda, I'm sorry, but I can't do this. I know you're still involved with someone else. I can't believe you." I left Miranda in tears, packed my bag, and drove to the Holiday Inn. My cell phone woke me up the next morning, and it was my son. "Dad, what did you say to Mom last night?" She cried all night. "Son, this is a bit awkward to tell you, but she's still having a relationship with someone else. I'm not happy right now. I know you're flying back today, and I'll come over in 2 hours to drive you to the airport. But I don't want your mother to come along, and I don't want to see her." I stayed for an additional 3 days before returning to Jamaica. Sam had received a settlement offer from the hospital. They offered $500,000, but we settled out of court for $750,000, and after taxes and Frank's fees, I was left with $500,000. That would go a long way. I said my goodbyes to everyone except Miranda and boarded my plane for the next chapter in my life. Update: life was great. I spruced up my little beach bungalow and bought a used Jeep. I kept up with my beach runs and sunbathing. Now and then I'd receive mail or a postcard from one of the kids. One day I received a letter from Sam. He filled me in on all the news. My divorce had gone smoothly, and now I was a free man. Miranda had won both her court cases, with the hospital paying her $5 million and Alexander being charged $1 million he couldn't afford, leading to his bankruptcy. Good for Miranda. She was financially set for life and wouldn't have to worry about money. Sam also mentioned that the house was sold and most of the furniture was put in storage. There was no word about where or how Miranda was living, not that I really cared. She had hurt me once, and I wasn't going through that again. I heard from Zara about once a month, and she always teasingly called me a fool and assured me that Mom was doing fine, telling me not to worry. I couldn't help but worry that Zara had given up on me. Leo wasn't the best at staying in touch, but I wasn't concerned because he had a busy social life. Several wonderful months passed, and gradually I began feeling like a human again and started desiring the company of a lovely woman. Just a few miles away were the main commercial areas of the island, where many resorts made the island famous. Quite a few middle-aged women came to these resorts for various reasons. The resorts hosted dances 3 or 4 times a week, and it was rare that I couldn't find a nice-looking woman to chat with. This usually involved lots of dancing and wine. That's how I met Dolly. She was petite, around 5'2", with brown hair and striking deep blue eyes. Dolly worked as an investment broker and needed a break from the stock market stress and the daily grind of making money for people. We danced the night away and enjoyed plenty of wine. The music was still playing when she suggested we step outside for some fresh air. We strolled down to the beach, and she suddenly kissed me. We talked, and I found out she was staying at the resort for a month. I proposed showing her around the island, and naturally, we ended up back at my bungalow. She was very open about her desires and didn't hesitate to mention that she had a lot of partners in her life. Dolly, despite being 38, had never been married or had kids and hadn't found the right person yet. She wasn't certain about having children, but definitely wanted to meet the right partner and settle down eventually. Dolly spent the entire month with me in my bungalow, only returning to the resort to fetch more clothes. I've never connected with anyone the way I did with Dolly. We never explicitly said I love you, but there was an unspoken understanding that conveyed that message without us having to utter the words. As her 30-day vacation was coming to an end, neither of us wanted to spoil the mood by discussing what would happen when she left. The night before Dolly was set to depart, we moved her back to a room at the resort. There was a dance that night, as was customary before a large group left. Naturally, we attended, given our shared love for dancing. Things were heating up on the dance floor when I spotted her across the room. She was in a booth and getting intimate with someone. Dolly immediately sensed something was wrong and asked me about it. I simply mentioned that I had seen my ex across the room engaging in inappropriate behavior with her boyfriend, whom I thought had disappeared long ago. I told Dolly that I had to say something to them, so we approached their booth. "Miranda, it seems my suspicions were right, and you never stopped seeing this guy," I said. Miranda pushed David away and began straightening her dress. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "I live here. Well, have you forgotten? You told me your affair was over and that you never wanted to see this guy again. What's going on? Were those all lies?" David got out of the booth and tried to confront me. "You're divorced now, so who sees and what she does is none of your concern. Although I'll admit that we never stopped sleeping together." "Yes, I suspected as much," I replied. "However, I don't appreciate being lied to and deceived. My ex-wife has been doing that. We were once in love and would have never lied to each other. I can only blame you for changing the woman I loved. Your actions broke up both our marriages, and the word jerk doesn't begin to describe the unhappiness you've caused." He held me up with one hand and continued with his threats. I dropped to the floor. At that point, the bouncers swarmed our table and Dolly explained how. This man had attacked me. There were several witnesses to the incident. An ambulance was called and I was rushed to the hospital. I was unconscious the following morning. After regaining my senses, the police interviewed me. They asked if I wanted to press charges, and naturally, I said yes. Dolly was there holding my hand, and she had been with me throughout the night. The past 30 days have been the most unforgettable and joyful time of my life. I've never had so much fun and felt so comfortable with anyone before. I have to admit, I've fallen in love with you. Please stay with me. Don't go back to work in your old life. I'm not wealthy, but we'd have enough for a comfortable life without ever having to work again. I love you, but I need some time to think about giving everything up. Part of me immediately says yes, but there are some loose ends I need closure on before making that commitment. Can you understand? Understand? Take as much time as you need. You know where I live. Dolly kissed me and left, as she had a plane to catch. It felt like the second love of my life had just walked away from me. I stayed in the hospital for 2 days. I heard that Alexander was out on bail but might be facing jail time. I packed a small suitcase and returned to Dallas to see my lawyer. Sam was happy to see me but shocked to see the state I was in. "Jack, what brings you back to civilization?" he asked. "I need legal advice." "Do you remember that I received a small settlement from the hospital?" "Yes, it was for $750,000. Why?" "Well, I was wondering if, since Miranda and I were still technically married, she's entitled to half of that under the community property law." "Yes, technically she is, but her settlement was for $5 million. Why would she want half of yours?" "I don't know if she's interested or not in my settlement, but I want half of her payment." I was perfectly fine with her having it because I thought she had ended her affair with her ex-boss and agreed to all my conditions. However, I've recently found out that she didn't stop seeing him, even after we separated and before the divorce. In fact, she's still seeing him. I informed Sam of her whereabouts, and that same afternoon, he hopped on a plane to Jamaica and hand-delivered the legal documents to Miranda. He later reported that she had already spent a significant chunk of her settlement money. She reluctantly wrote the check. I stayed with Zara and her husband and shared with her what I had uncovered. Zara admitted she had suspicions, but Mom had denied any involvement with David. I asked if she was certain Mom was going to the counselor and not to see her lover. Zara wasn't sure. Sam returned the next day with some good news. Miranda had reluctantly agreed to split the money, minus her share of my settlement. I headed back to Jamaica, and upon arriving at my bungalow, I found Dolly sitting on my patio. She said, "If you can stand having me around, I'm here to stay." "Dolly, if you'd have me, would you do me the honor of marrying me?" Without any hesitation, I said yes. Update: Dolly and I tied the knot with some of her friends in attendance. Life was great. Miranda, having spent a good portion of her settlement money, had to return to work and couldn't establish a lasting relationship. As for David Alexander, he spent a year behind bars and faced a grim future upon his release, being a felon, bankrupt, and divorced.
Story 3.
The first rays of dawn painted the bedroom walls in soft amber hues as Ted stirred from his sleep. The warmth of Linda's body next to his brought a rare sense of peace, a feeling he hadn't experienced in longer than he cared to remember. Their lovemaking last night had been different, not the mechanical act it had become over the years, but something that reminded him of their earlier days together. He turned his head on the pillow, studying his wife's profile in the growing light. 20 years of marriage had left its marks on both of them, silver threading through her dark hair, fine lines at the corners of her eyes, but in this moment, she looked exactly like the woman he'd fallen in love with 2 decades ago. Her chest rose and fell with steady breaths, and Ted found himself matching his breathing to hers. Just as he used to do when they first shared a bed, the digital clock on the nightstand showed 6:45 a.m. Usually, he'd be up by now, preparing for another day at the office. Today, though, something made him linger. Maybe it was the unusual tenderness of last night, or perhaps the hope that had begun to flicker in his chest, hope that they might find their way back to each other after years of growing apart. But Linda's eyelids fluttered, and she turned toward him with a sleepy smile that made his heart skip. For a brief moment, everything felt right in their world. Then something shifted in her expression, a shadow passing across her face, a tightening around her mouth that set off warning bells in Ted's mind. "Good morning," he said, his voice still rough with sleep. That Linda's smile faltered. "Morning." She sat up slowly, pulling the sheet around herself like armor. Her fingers began twisting in the fabric, a nervous habit he'd noticed more frequently in recent months. "Ted." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "We need to talk." The hope in his chest withered, replaced by a familiar heaviness. He'd heard that tone before, seen that look. Nothing good ever followed those words. "What is it?" He pushed himself up to sitting position, his back against the headboard. Linda wouldn't meet his eyes. She stared at her hands, still twisting the sheet between her fingers. She swallowed hard, and Ted watched her throat work with emotion. "I've met someone." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and poisonous. Ted felt them sink into his skin like acid, burning away the warmth of moments ago. "His name is Ronnie," Linda continued, words tumbling out faster now, as if she couldn't hold them back any longer. "I didn't mean for it to happen, but I love him, Ted. And I still love you too. Ted stared at her, trying to process the words, trying to make them make sense. The room seemed to tilt slightly, reality shifting on its axis. You love him, he repeated, his voice flat. Yes. Linda reached for his hand, but he pulled away before she could touch him. That's why I wanted to suggest something. An arrangement that could work for all of us. An arrangement. The word tasted bitter in his mouth like copper and bile. An open marriage. Linda's eyes were pleading now, wide and desperate. I could split my time between you both. Share my love fairly. It doesn't have to mean the end of us, Ted. It could be a new beginning. Ted felt the mattress shift as Linda moved closer, but he couldn't look at her. His gaze fixed on the wedding photo, hanging on the opposite wall, their younger selves smiling, full of hope and promises. Promises that now lay shattered between them. How long? The question came out rougher than he intended. Linda's hesitation spoke volumes before she finally answered. 3 months? 3 months. A quarter of a year, she'd been living a double life, sleeping in their bed while carrying another man's touch on her skin. Ted's stomach churned. Ted, please say something. Linda's voice cracked. You do love me, don't you? Just think about it. Please? He got out of bed, movements mechanical as he gathered his clothes from where they'd been discarded the night before. Each article of clothing felt like evidence of their intimacy, now tainted by her confession. The room felt too small, the air too thick with the weight of her betrayal. Ted! Linda's voice rose, tinged with panic. Please talk to me. We can work this out. I know we can. He pulled on his pants, then his shirt, fingers fumbling with the buttons. The wedding ring on his left hand caught the morning light, mocking him. 20 years of marriage. And this was what it had come to, his wife suggesting he share her with another man like some kind of timeshare arrangement. It's not what you're thinking, Linda continued, getting out of bed and wrapping herself in her robe. Ronnie understands. He's willing to try this arrangement too. We can make a schedule. Keep everything fair. Fair? Ted's voice came out as a harsh laugh that made Linda flinch. You've been cheating on me for 3 months, and now you want to make it fair? It's not cheating, Linda protested, stepping toward him. I'm being honest about my feelings. I'm trying to find a way for everyone to be happy. Why can't you just try to understand? Ted finished buttoning his shirt, each movement deliberate and controlled while chaos raged inside him. Understand what? That my wife has been fucking another man behind my back? That she wants me to graciously step aside half the time so she can continue doing it with my blessing? That's not. Linda's eyes filled with tears. I love you both. Different kinds of love, but both real. Both important. Please, Ted. You do love me, don't you? Just think about it. That's all I'm asking. The tears that had always moved him before now only fueled the cold rage building inside him. Without another word, he walked out of the bedroom, ignoring Linda's calls after him. He grabbed his keys from the hook by the door and left the house, letting the door close behind him with a final sounding click. The morning air hit him like a slap, crisp with the first hint of autumn. Ted stood on the front step for a moment, his world tilting on its axis. Everything looked the same: the familiar street, the neighbor's cat sunning itself on the sidewalk, the kids waiting for the school bus at the corner, but nothing would ever be the same again. He got into his car and started the engine, no destination in mind. Just away. Away from the house, away from Linda, away from the wreckage of what he'd thought was a solid marriage. As he pulled out of the driveway, he caught a glimpse of Linda watching from the bedroom window, one hand pressed against the glass. Ted turned the corner and didn't look back. Ted drove without direction, his hands clenched on the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. The morning traffic flowed around him as his mind replayed Linda's words on an endless loop. I love him. Share my love fairly. An open marriage. Each repetition carved the betrayal deeper, until it felt like a physical wound in his chest. His phone buzzed in his pocket the third time in the past hour. He didn't need to look to know. It was Linda, probably trying to explain, to justify, to convince him. There was nothing left to say. Nothing that could excuse 3 months of lies. The dashboard clock showed 9:45 a.m. He should be at work, sitting through the morning meeting, reviewing quarterly reports. Instead, he was driving aimlessly through the city while his world crumbled around him. He pulled into a coffee shop parking lot, needing a moment to gather his thoughts inside. The barista's cheerful "good morning" felt like it came from another universe, one where wives didn't casually destroy 20 years of marriage over morning coffee. Ted ordered black coffee, his voice sounding strange in his own ears that as he waited for his drink. His gaze fell on a young couple in the corner. They sat close together, sharing occasional touches and secret smiles. Ted remembered being that young, that in love. He and Linda had been like that once, hadn't they? When had things changed? When had they grown so far apart that she could fall in love with another man without him noticing? "Sir? Your coffee." Ted startled, realizing the barista had called him twice. He took the cup with a mumbled thanks and found a seat by the window. The coffee was too hot, burning his tongue, but he welcomed the pain. It gave him something to focus on besides the hollow ache in his chest. His phone buzzed again. This time, he pulled it out. "Please come home. We need to talk about this. I love you." Ted stared at the message until the screen went dark. Love. The word meant nothing now. How could she claim to love him while planning to split her time between him and another man? Like a child with two homes after a divorce. Except they'd all be willing participants in this farce. The coffee grew cold as memories washed over him. Their first date at that Italian restaurant downtown, now closed, replaced by a trendy bistro. The night he proposed, down on one knee in her parents' garden. Their wedding day, Linda radiant in white, promising to forsake all others. 20 years of shared dreams, shared struggles, shared life, all of it tainted now by 3 months of deception. His phone buzzed with another message. "At least answer, so I know you're okay." Ted turned off the phone and slipped it back into his pocket. Linda's concern felt like another betrayal. She didn't get to worry about him anymore. Not after what she'd done back in the car. Ted found himself driving toward the city park where they'd spent countless Sunday afternoons in their early years. The parking lot was nearly empty this time of day. He pulled into a spot overlooking the duck pond and killed the engine. A family of ducks paddled across the water, mother, father, and a line of ducklings following in their wake. Ted watched them until they disappeared into the reeds on the far shore. Even ducks mated for life. What did that say about human nature? About Linda? The sun climbed higher in the sky as Ted sat there, his mind cycling through the signs he should have seen. The late nights at work, the new clothes, the sudden interest in her appearance, the way she'd grown distant in bed until last night. Last night, when he'd thought they were finally reconnecting, she'd already been planning this confession. Had she been thinking of Ronnie while they made love? The thought made bile rise in his throat. Ted got out of the car, needing to move, to breathe. He walked the familiar path around the pond, past the bench where they used to sit and feed the ducks, past the gazebo where they'd sheltered from summer storms. Every step brought another memory, another moment now shadowed by betrayal. An elderly couple approached from the opposite direction, walking hand in hand. The woman smiled at Ted as they passed. He tried to return the gesture, but his face felt frozen. Would that have been him and Linda in 20 years? Growing old together, still holding hands? Or would she have been holding Ronnie's hand by then? The thought stopped him in his tracks. There would be no growing old together now. No shared future. Linda had made sure of that with her selfish proposal. His feet carried him back to the car as clouds gathered overhead, matching his darkening mood. The dashboard clock showed 2:30 p.m. He'd been driving and walking for hours, but the pain hadn't diminished. If anything, it had crystallized into something harder, colder. More messages waited on his phone when he turned it back on. He deleted them without reading them. Whatever justifications or explanations Linda had come up with during his absence, he didn't want to hear them. The first drops of rain hit his windshield as Ted pulled out of the parking lot. He should go to work, try to salvage something of this day. Instead, he found himself driving toward downtown, toward the office buildings where he knew several divorce lawyers had their practices. The decision crystallized in his mind with each mile. There would be no discussion, no consideration of Linda's twisted proposal. Some betrayals couldn't be forgiven. Some bridges, once burned, could never be rebuilt. Thunder rumbled overhead as Ted parked in front of a professional-looking office building. The directory in the lobby listed several law firms. He chose one at random and took the elevator to the 4th floor. The receptionist looked up as he entered. taking in his rumpled appearance with professional neutrality. "Can I help you? I need to speak with someone about filing for divorce." The words came out steady, certain. Behind them, Ted felt something shift and settle in his chest. Linda had made her choice. Now he was making his. The house felt different when Ted returned that evening. Every room echoed with the memory of Linda's words. Every familiar object transformed into a reminder of betrayal. He walked through the kitchen, past the unwashed coffee cups from that morning a lifetime ago, and into his home office. The legal assistant had given him a thick folder of documents to review. Ted spread them across his desk, each page another nail in the coffin of his marriage. Property division forms, asset disclosure statements, pension splitting calculations. 20 years of shared life reduced to columns of numbers and legal terminology. His phone lit up with another message from Linda. He'd turned the ringer off hours ago, but her texts kept coming. Each one felt like a fresh wound. "Please come home. We can work through this. Just talk to me. I never meant to hurt you." Ted picked up the phone, thumb hovering over the block button. Instead, he typed a single message. "I'll be staying in the guest room until further notice. Don't wait up." He pressed send and turned off the phone before she could respond. The next morning, Ted rose early and left for work before Linda woke. He'd spent the night staring at the guest room ceiling, mind churning with memories and calculations. Now, sitting at his desk at work, he opened a new spreadsheet and began listing their shared assets. The house they'd bought 10 years ago. Its value nearly doubled since then. Their retirement accounts, carefully built over 2 decades. The vacation property at the lake, rarely used in recent years. Joint bank accounts, credit cards, insurance policies. The threads of their intertwined lives would need to be carefully unraveled. "Ted!" His assistant Margaret stood in the doorway, concern etched on her face. "Your 9 o'clock is here." He glanced at his watch, surprised to find 2 hours had passed while he cataloged the remains of his marriage. "Thanks, Margaret. Give me 5 minutes." The day passed in a blur of meetings and phone calls. Ted moved through them on autopilot, his mind split between work and the growing list of tasks needed to dismantle his life. By evening, he had appointments scheduled with a financial advisor, a real estate agent, and 2 more divorce lawyers. Linda was waiting when he got home, perched on the edge of the living room sofa like a visitor in her own house. "Can we talk?" Ted walked past her toward the stairs. "Nothing to talk about." "Please." She stood, reaching for his arm. "Just listen. What I'm suggesting, other couples make it work. We could too if you just try." "Other couples?" Ted turned, fixing her with a cold stare. "You mean other men who let their wives sleep around? Other marriages where faithfulness and trust mean nothing?" "It's not like that." Linda's voice rose. "Ronnie and I, it's different. Special. But that doesn't mean I don't love you too." "Stop." The word came out like a whip crack. "Just stop, Linda. You don't get to talk about love anymore. Not after lying to my face for 3 months." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I was afraid to tell you. Afraid you'd react exactly like this. But I'm being honest now. Doesn't that count for something?" Ted laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. "Honest? You're only being honest because you got caught. Or did you think I wouldn't notice eventually? The late nights, the new clothes, the way you couldn't look me in the eye. I wanted to tell you sooner," Linda whispered. I needed time to figure things out." "Well, you've got it now." Ted started up the stairs. "Take all the time you need with Ronnie. I'll be talking to my lawyer." The next few days settled into an uncomfortable routine. Ted left early for work, spent his lunch hours meeting with various professionals, and returned late. Linda tried repeatedly to engage him in conversation, but he responded only when necessary, speaking in monosyllables about practical matters. That on Wednesday evening, she cornered him in the kitchen. "I'm going to spend next week with Ronnie," she announced, her voice trembling slightly. "Maybe some time apart will help you think things through." Ted continued, making his sandwich without looking up. "Do what you want. I'll be back next Friday," she said, lingering in the doorway. "We can talk then? Please?" The knife scraped against the cutting board as Ted sliced the sandwich with precise movements. Linda waited a moment longer, then left. The sound of her footsteps fading up the stairs seemed to echo through the empty kitchen Friday morning. Ted watched from the guest room window as Linda loaded a small suitcase into her car. She glanced up at the house before getting in, perhaps hoping to see him watching. He stepped back from the window, waiting until he heard her car pull away before heading downstairs. The house felt emptier without her presence, but also cleaner somehow, like lancing a wound, letting the poison drain away. Ted spent the weekend methodically preparing for what came next. That he gathered financial documents, photographed valuable items, and made copies of everything that might be relevant to the divorce. Each task felt like another step toward freedom, toward reclaiming his life from the wreckage of Linda's betrayal. The lawyer he'd chosen, Michael Richardson, had a reputation for handling high-conflict divorces efficiently. Their Monday morning meeting confirmed Ted's choice. No children involved. That simplifies things, Richardson noted, reviewing Ted's file. You mentioned your wife is currently staying with her companion? For the week, Ted confirmed. She thinks it's temporary. A trial separation, while I think things through. Richardson's expression remained neutral. And you're certain about proceeding with divorce? No interest in marriage counseling or reconciliation? None. Ted's voice was firm. She made her choice. Now I'm making mine. Very well. Richardson pulled out a thick folder. Let's discuss strategy. Given the circumstances, we'll want to move quickly once we file. The element of surprise can be advantageous in these situations. They spent the next 2 hours planning the divorce filing in detail. By the time Ted left the office, he had a clear roadmap for the weeks ahead. The papers would be ready for Linda's return on Friday, one final surprise for the woman who thought she could have everything her way. The rest of the week passed in a blur of preparation. Ted moved most of his important documents and irreplaceable items to a safety deposit box. He opened new bank accounts in his name only and began transferring his portion of their joint funds, everything carefully documented and well within legal limits. Each evening, he returned to the empty house and worked methodically through his checklist. Pack essential items. Photograph rooms for documentation. Research apartments in different parts of the city. The practical tasks helped keep his mind off the deeper wounds. The betrayal that still burned beneath his calculated efficiency. That Linda's daily texts had dwindled to occasional updates about when she'd return. Ted ignored them all. Let her enjoy her week with Ronnie. Let her believe she still had choices to make. Friday would bring reality crashing down around her carefully constructed fantasies. On Thursday night, Ted sat in his home office, studying the divorce papers one final time. Tomorrow, Linda would return expecting to continue their discussion, to press her case for her twisted arrangement. Instead, she would find these papers waiting, the consequences of her choices laid out in cold legal language. He ran his finger over his wedding ring, then slowly pulled it off. The pale band of skin beneath looked strange, vulnerable. Ted placed the ring in an envelope with Linda's name on it and set it beside the divorce papers. One last gesture to mark the end of 20 years. Outside, a storm was brewing. Thunder rolled in the distance as Ted climbed the stairs to the guest room for what would be his last night in this house. Tomorrow would bring Linda's return, and with it, the final act of their marriage. But for now, he felt only a grim satisfaction. The pieces were in place. The trap was set. Let her come home to her surprise. Let her face the consequences of her betrayal. Ted had made his choice, and there would be no going back. Friday dawned gray and cold, matching Ted's mood as he prepared for Linda's return. He'd barely slept, spending most of the night reviewing his strategy with the same attention to detail he gave to complex business deals. The manila envelope containing the divorce papers sat on the coffee table, a silent bomb waiting to detonate. Ted heard Linda's car pull into the driveway at precisely 10 o'clock. He stood at the living room window, watching as she retrieved her suitcase from the trunk. She looked different, somehow lighter, happier. A week with Ronnie had clearly agreed with her. The observation hardened his resolve even further. The key turned in the lock, and Linda stepped into the foyer. Ted. Her voice carried a note of hopeful uncertainty. Are you home? In here. His voice was steady, controlled. Linda appeared in the living room doorway, still wearing her coat. Her smile faltered as she took in his expression and the envelope on the coffee table. What's that? Sit down. Ted gestured to the armchair across from him. Ted. The tremor in her voice suggested she already suspected what was coming. What's going on? Sit down. Linda sank into the chair, her face pale. Ted picked up the envelope and held it out to her. Everything's their division of assets, alimony calculations, all of it. My lawyer can explain the details. Linda stared at the envelope as if it might bite her. Divorce papers? Her voice cracked on the word. No, Ted, please. We can work this out. I love you. Stop. Ted's voice cut through her protests like a blade. Just stop, Linda. You don't love me. You love the idea of keeping me as a backup plan while you play house with Ronnie. That's not true. Tears spilled down Linda's cheeks as she clutched the envelope. I love you both, differently but equally. Why can't you understand that? Because it's bullshit. Ted stood, towering over her. You don't get to have both. You made your choice when you started sleeping with him. Now you get to live with the consequences. Linda threw the envelope aside and stood, reaching for him. Please, Ted. 20 years of marriage. You're just going to throw it all away. He stepped back, avoiding her touch. No, Linda. You did that. I'm just making it official. We can fix this. The desperation in her voice filled the room. Marriage counseling, therapy, anything you want. Just please don't do this. Ted laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. Fix what? The fact that you've been fucking another man for 3 months? The fact that you had the audacity to suggest I share you with him? What exactly do you think we can fix? I was trying to be honest. Linda's voice rose. I was trying to find a way for everyone to be happy. No. Ted's voice remained deadly quiet. You were trying to have your cake and eat it too. You wanted the security of our marriage while you explored your passion with Ronnie. Well, congratulations. You're free to be with him full-time now. Linda collapsed back into the chair, sobbing. You're being cruel. This isn't like you, Ted. The man I married would at least try to understand. The man you married? Ted's control finally cracked. The man you married trusted you. The man you married believed in our vows. That man died the moment you decided to spread your legs for Ronnie. Don't you dare. Linda shot to her feet, anger replacing tears. What we have is real. Ronnie understands me in ways you never could. He accepts all of me, not just the parts that fit into your perfect little world. And how was your week with him? Ted's voice dripped contempt. Did he understand you better with his dick inside you? Did you feel accepted while betraying every promise you ever made to me? Linda slapped him, the crack of her palm against his cheek echoing in the quiet room. Ted didn't flinch. He simply stared at her, his eyes cold. I've arranged to have my things moved out by the end of next week, he said, his voice returning to its earlier calm. The house is yours until it sells. After that, have your lawyer contact mine about the proceeds. Ted. Linda's anger deflated, leaving only desperation. Please don't do this. Give me another chance. Give us another chance. He walked to the door, pausing with his hand on the knob. You had your chance. 20 years of chances. You threw them away for 3 months with Ronnie. Where are you going? Panic edged into her voice. Away from you. He opened the door. Goodbye, Linda. Wait. She rushed forward, grabbing his arm. You can't just leave like this. We need to talk about this properly. Please, Ted. I'll do anything. I'll break it off with Ronnie. Ted pulled his arm free with enough force to make her stumble. You still don't get it, do you? There's nothing left to talk about. Nothing left to save. You killed our marriage the moment you chose him. I made a mistake. Linda's voice rose to a shriek. People make mistakes. You're not perfect either, Ted. Remember that business trip to Boston 3 years ago? The lipstick on your collar? Ted turned back, his expression darkening. There was no lipstick, Linda. No affairs. No betrayals. I kept my vows. You're the only one who broke them. The lie died in Linda's throat as she saw the truth in his eyes. She sagged against the doorframe, defeated. What am I supposed to do now? Whatever you want. Ted's voice was empty of emotion. You're free now. Isn't that what you wanted? Freedom to be with Ronnie without the inconvenience of a faithful husband. He walked to his car, Linda's sobs following him down the driveway. The sound stirred nothing in him, no pity, no regret. Only a cold satisfaction that justice was finally being served. As he drove away, Ted caught a final glimpse of Linda in his rearview mirror, a crumpled figure in the doorway of what was once their home. The sight brought no pain, no second thoughts. Some bridges, once burned, could never be rebuilt. Some betrayals cut too deep for forgiveness. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: he would face it on his own terms, without compromise, without looking back. Linda had made her choice, and now she would live with the consequences. Ted pressed the accelerator, leaving behind the house, the marriage, and the woman who had destroyed them both. The future stretched before him, empty of Linda's lies and betrayals. It wasn't the future he'd planned, but it was his now, his alone, and that was enough. 3 months after serving Linda the divorce papers, Ted stood in his new apartment, surrounded by moving boxes and the remnants of his old life. The space felt alien, yet liberating, a blank canvas unmarked by memories of betrayal. His phone buzzed with a message from his realtor. Offer on the house. Asking price. Buyers want quick close. Ted typed back a quick response. Accept. Have them contact my lawyer. Another piece of his old life dismantled. The house would sell, the proceeds would be split, and another link to Linda would be severed. The thought brought a grim satisfaction. The doorbell rang, his first visitor in the new place. Ted opened the door to find Mark, his oldest friend, holding a 6-pack of beer. Nice neighborhood, Mark said, stepping inside. He whistled as he took in the view of the city through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Corner unit, 20th floor. You're moving up in the world, buddy. Moving on, Ted corrected, taking a beer. Different thing. Mark settled onto the leather couch, one of Ted's few new purchases. Heard from Linda lately? Her lawyer contacts my lawyer. That's all I need. Ted remained standing, looking out over the city lights. Margaret mentioned seeing her at Maxwell's last week. Mark popped his beer open, said she was with some guy. Younger, flashy type. Ronnie. The name tasted bitter on Ted's tongue. Her soulmate. The love of her life. At least until the next one comes along. You're better off, man. Mark's voice carried the weight of 20 years of friendship. What she did, that's not something you come back from. Ted turned from the window. You know what kills me? She actually thought I'd agree to it. Share her with him like some kind of, what did she call it? Fair arrangement. Nothing fair about it. Mark shook his head. You see the therapist again this week? Yesterday. Ted sat in the armchair opposite his friend. Dr. Reynolds thinks I'm making progress. Whatever that means. Are you? Ted considered the question. The raw wound of Linda's betrayal had scabbed over, leaving something harder underneath. I'm functioning. Work's good. Signed 2 new clients last month. That's not what I asked. What do you want me to say, Mark? Ted's voice edged with frustration. That I'm over it? That I've forgotten 20 years of marriage going up in flames because my wife couldn't keep her legs closed? No. Mark leaned forward. I want you to be honest. With yourself, if no one else. Ted stood and paced to the window again. The city sprawled below, millions of lives intersecting, falling apart, rebuilding. You want honesty? Fine. I'm angry. All the time. I wake up angry. I go to work angry. I go to sleep angry. Good? Ted turned. Good. You good? Mark met his gaze steadily. Anger's better than denial. Better than letting her convince you it was somehow your fault. She tried that. Ted's laugh held no humor. Said I was being unreasonable, rigid, that I should be more open-minded about modern relationships. What did Dr. Reynolds say about that? That anger's a natural response to betrayal. That I need to process it, not suppress it. Ted returned to his chair. She also suggested I start dating again. Mark raised an eyebrow. And I told her I'd rather focus on work. Ted, Mark's voice carried a warning. Don't let Linda's betrayal turn you into a monk. There are good women out there. Women who understand what commitment means. Like Maria. Ted mentioned Mark's wife deliberately, steering the conversation away from himself. 25 years next month. Mark smiled. And you know what? She thinks Linda's crazy. Said any woman who'd throw away a man like you doesn't deserve a second chance. Maria always was the smart one. Ted managed a small smile. How are the kids? They talked about safer topics: Mark's children, work, the upcoming football season. But underneath the normal conversation, Ted felt the constant throb of anger and betrayal, like a broken bone that hadn't quite healed later. After Mark left, Ted stood at his window again. The The city had changed as night fell, transformed into a maze of lights and shadows. Somewhere out there, Linda was probably with Ronnie, living the exciting new life she'd chosen. His phone buzzed a text from an unknown number. His thumb hovered over the delete button, but something made him read it. It's Linda. Please don't delete this. We need to talk. It's important. Ted stared at the message, feeling the familiar surge of anger. After a moment, he typed back, "Contact my lawyer." The response came immediately. "Please, Ted. Just 5 minutes. In person. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. Like our marriage was important." He typed, then deleted it. No, she didn't deserve even that much response. He blocked the number and tossed the phone aside. The doorbell rang again. Ted opened it to find his neighbor, Karen, a divorced executive he'd met during the move-in. "Hey," she smiled warmly. "I made too much pasta. Thought you might be hungry." She held up a container, and the smell of garlic and herbs wafted through the doorway. Ted hesitated. Karen was attractive, intelligent, and clearly interested. Under different circumstances, "Thanks," he said, stepping back. "But I already ate." Disappointment flickered across her face, quickly masked. "Of course. Maybe another time. Maybe." They both knew it wouldn't happen. After she left, Ted stared at his reflection in the window. Dr. Reynolds would say he was isolating himself, avoiding opportunities for connection. Maybe she was right. But the thought of trusting someone again, of being vulnerable, his phone buzzed with another text, this time from his lawyer. Linda's attorney filed a motion. Wants to renegotiate the settlement. Claims new circumstances. Ted typed back, "No negotiations. Stick to the original terms." Strong position, his lawyer responded. "Meeting tomorrow at 2? I'll be there." Ted grabbed his laptop and settled on the couch. Work would keep his mind occupied, keep the anger at bay. He had proposals to review, clients to contact, a life to rebuild. The city lights flickered outside his window like distant stars, cold and unreachable. Somewhere out there, Linda was living her new life with Ronnie. Let her. Ted had his own life to live now, on his terms. Without compromise, the anger would fade eventually. Or maybe it wouldn't. Either way, he'd survive. He'd rebuild. And he'd never let anyone close enough to betray him again. The law office lobby felt too warm as Ted waited for his meeting about Linda's attempt to renegotiate the settlement. He loosened his tie, checking his watch again. 1:55 p.m. His lawyer was running late. The elevator dinged, and Ted looked up, expecting to see Richardson. Instead, Linda stepped out. The sight of her stopped him cold. She looked different, thinner, paler, with dark circles under her eyes, poorly concealed by makeup. "Ted." Her voice cracked on his name. "Please don't leave. I knew you'd be here today." He stood, heading for the exit. "I have nothing to say to you." "Wait." She grabbed his arm. He noticed she was trembling. "Please. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." "Time's up, Linda." "About 6 months up." He tried to pull away, but her grip tightened. "You don't understand." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I'm in trouble, Ted. Real trouble." Before he could respond, Richardson emerged from the elevator. "Ted? Linda? Is everything all right here?" "Everything's fine," Ted said, finally extracting his arm from Linda's grip. "Mrs. Harrison was just leaving." "Please." Linda's voice shook. "Michael, could you give us a moment? It's important." Richardson looked between them. "Ted." "No." Ted's voice was firm. "Whatever she has to say, she can say it through her lawyer." Linda's face crumpled. "You don't understand. I can't. He reads all my emails. Monitors my phone. My lawyer. He's Ronnie's friend." That caught Ted's attention. He studied her more carefully now, the way she kept glancing at the elevator, the slight flinch when someone walked past. Signs he recognized from his company's domestic violence awareness training. "Michael," Ted said, not taking his eyes off Linda. "Give us 10 minutes?" Richardson nodded and stepped away. Ted guided Linda to a quiet corner of the lobby, maintaining his distance, but lowering his voice. "Talk." Linda wrapped her arms around herself. "Ronnie, he's not who I thought he was. The things he makes me do, makes you." Ted's voice sharpened. "He's violent," Linda whispered. "Controlling. At first, it was just little things. Checking my phone, telling me what to wear. But now what? He hurts me. She pulled up her sleeve, revealing finger-shaped bruises. Forces me to do things. With his friends. His father. Her voice broke. He films it. Says if I leave, he'll put the videos online. Send them to everyone I know. Ted felt bile rise in his throat. Have you gone to the police? Linda laughed, a brittle sound. His brother is a cop. His best friend works in the DA's office. He has everyone in his pocket, Ted. I'm trapped. That's not my problem anymore. The words came out automatically, but they felt hollow. I know. Linda's eyes filled with tears. I know I deserve this. I threw away everything good in my life for him. But please, Ted, I don't know who else to turn to. You made your choice. His voice hardened. You chose him over our marriage. Over 20 years together. Now you get to live with that choice. He'll kill me. The words hung in the air between them. I'm not being dramatic, Ted. He told me exactly how he'd do it. Make it look like an accident. No one would ever know. Ted studied her face, searching for manipulation, for lies. He found only raw fear. What do you want from me? Help. The word came out as a sob. Please. I'll do anything. Sign whatever you want in the divorce. Give up all claims to everything. Just help me get away from him. And go where? Ted's voice was cold. Back to our house? Back to our life? That's not happening, Linda. I know that. She wiped her eyes. I know I destroyed everything. I know you'll never forgive me. I don't expect you to. I need help getting out. Starting over somewhere else. Anywhere else. Ted felt the familiar anger rising. You didn't think about starting over when you were spreading your legs for him. When you were telling me how special your connection was. When you wanted me to accept being your part-time husband. Linda flinched at each word. I was wrong. So wrong. I know that now. Now that he's showing his true colors? Now that your exciting affair has turned into a nightmare. Ted's voice dripped contempt. This isn't my problem anymore, Linda. You wanted freedom? Congratulations. You're free. Ted, please, no. He cut her off. Contact a women's shelter. Call a domestic violence hotline. Hell, call your parents. But don't come to me. You lost that right when you betrayed our marriage. Fresh tears spilled down Linda's cheeks. He knows about the shelters. Monitors them. My parents, he threatened them too. Said he'd hurt my mom if I went to them. She grabbed his arm again. Please, Ted. You're the only one strong enough to stand up to him. The only one he can't control. Ted pulled his arm free. This isn't my fight. I know I have no right to ask. Linda's voice broke. But the man I married, he wouldn't let anyone suffer like this. Not even someone who hurt him. That man died. Ted turned away. You killed him the day you chose Ronnie. He walked toward Richardson's office, Linda's sobs echoing behind him. The sound stirred something in his chest, not sympathy, exactly, but a distant echo of the protectiveness he'd once felt for her. Ted! Richardson met him at the door. Everything okay? Ted glanced back at Linda's crumpled form in the lobby. Just another manipulation. Let's focus on the settlement. But as he followed Richardson into the conference room, Linda's words echoed in his mind. The man I married wouldn't let anyone suffer like this. That man was gone, wasn't he? Destroyed by betrayal. Replaced by someone harder, colder, wasn't he? Ted sat in his office late into the evening, Linda's words haunting him despite his best efforts to focus on work. The bruises on her arm, the fear in her eyes, they felt real in a way her tears during the divorce hadn't. His phone rang, displaying Mark's number. You free for dinner? Mark asked without preamble. Maria's making her lasagna. Not tonight. Ted rubbed his temples. Had an interesting meeting with Linda today. Interesting how? Ted stood walking to his office window. She showed up at Richardson's office. Claims Ronnie's abusing her. Threatening her. Manipulation? Mark's voice carried a note of skepticism. That's what I thought at first. Ted watched the sun setting over the city skyline. But something felt different. She had bruises, Mark. Real ones? Not your problem, man. Mark's response was immediate. She made her bed. That's what I told her. But Mark knew him too well. Ted sighed. But I can't shake this feeling. The thing she said about him, filming her with his friends, his father, threatening to kill her. Jesus. Mark was quiet for a moment. You believe her? Yeah. The admission felt heavy. I do. Still not your problem. I know. Ted turned from the window. She says he's got connections. Police, DA's office. No one she can turn to, except you. Mark's voice hardened. Don't do it, Ted. Don't let her pull you back in. I'm not. Ted's voice was firm. Whatever we had died the day, she chose him. But what? But maybe this isn't about her anymore. Ted sat back at his desk. Maybe it's about not letting some abusive bastard think he can get away with this. Ted. Mark's voice carried a warning. This guy sounds dangerous. You start poking around. Who knows what he might do? What's he going to do to me? Ted's laugh held no humor. I've already lost everything that mattered. You've rebuilt. Got a good life going. Don't risk it for her. Not for her. Ted's voice hardened. For justice. For consequences. Mark sighed. You're going to do this no matter what I say, aren't you? Probably. Then at least let me help. I've still got contacts from my police days. No. Ted's response was immediate. I need to handle this myself. Stubborn bastard. Mark's tone was affectionate, but worried. What's your plan? Don't have one yet. Ted opened his laptop. But Linda mentioned some things. Places. Names. Time to do some research. Be careful, man. Guys like this, they don't play by the rules. Neither do I. Ted started typing. Not anymore. After hanging up, Ted pulled up everything he could find on Ronnie. Social media, business records, court documents. A pattern emerged: failed businesses, lawsuits settled out of court, restraining orders that mysteriously disappeared. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Ted, it's Linda. New number. Please. He's getting worse. Ted saved the number, but didn't respond. Instead, he opened his email and began composing a message to an old client who worked in private security. The next morning, Ted arrived early at his office and called in his assistant. Margaret, cancel my appointments for the next few days. Family emergency. She raised an eyebrow. Everything okay? Will be. He handed her a folder. I need you to get these documents to Richardson. Tell him to hold off on the settlement negotiations. Of course. She hesitated. Ted? I saw Linda yesterday. At the market. She looked not good. Ted's jaw tightened. I know. Are you going to help her? No. He met her concerned gaze. I'm going to stop someone who thinks he can hurt people without consequences. That's all. Margaret nodded, understanding. Be careful. Always am. He managed a small smile. Hold my calls unless it's Mark or Richardson. After she left, Ted opened the file his security contact had sent. Ronnie's address, workplace, regular haunts, known associates. A pattern of movement that suggested routine, predictability. Weakness. His phone buzzed again. Linda. He found out I talked to you. Says he's going to teach me a lesson tonight. Please. Ted's fingers tightened on the phone until his knuckles went white. He typed back, address. The response came immediately, an apartment number in a complex across town. Ted grabbed his jacket and car keys. I in the elevator. His phone rang. Mark, don't do anything stupid, his friend said without greeting. Define stupid. You know what I mean? Mark's voice was tense. Whatever you're planning, take a step back. Think it through. I have. Ted stepped out into the parking garage. 3 months of thinking, research, planning. Ted, he films her. Mark. Ted's voice was cold. Forces her with his friends. His father. Threatens to put it online if she leaves. Mark was quiet for a moment. Jesus. Yeah. Ted reached his car. So don't tell me to step back. Some things need to be handled. At least let me. No. Ted cut him off. You got a family. A career. This needs to be clean. Contain. And you? I've got nothing left to lose. Ted started the engine. That's what makes me dangerous. He hung up before Mark could argue further. The morning traffic parted before him as he drove, his mind clear, focused. This wasn't about Linda anymore. This wasn't about their failed marriage or her betrayal. This was about justice. About consequences. About making sure a predator learned that some prey bite back. His phone buzzed one more time. Linda again. Please hurry. I'm scared. Ted pressed the accelerator, the city blurring around him. The man Linda married might be dead, killed by her betrayal. But something else had risen in his place. Something colder, harder, something Ronnie was about to meet. The apartment complex loomed before Ted, a stark concrete structure that seemed to absorb the morning light. He parked across the street, studying the building's entrance. A security camera hung above the door, its lens cracked and dusty more for show than function. His phone buzzed. Linda again. He left for work. Said he'd be back at lunch to deal with me. Ted checked his watch. 10:30 a.m. Plenty of time. He typed back, "Stay inside." Lock the door. The lobby was empty except for a half-asleep security guard who barely glanced up from his phone as Ted walked past. The elevator smelled of stale cigarettes and desperation. Ted watched the numbers climb to the 7th floor, his mind focused, calculating. Linda opened the door before he could knock, her face pale and drawn. "Ted, thank God don't." He stepped past her into the apartment, his eyes scanning the space. "Just tell me what I need to know." The apartment told its own story. Expensive furniture covered in cheap throws. Empty bottles on every surface. A laptop closed on the coffee table, its webcam light blinking. Ted walked over and shut it down. "He records everything," Linda said, wrapping her arms around herself. "Says it's for his protection." "Where does he keep the videos?" "External hard drives. In his office." She pointed to a closed door. "But they're encrypted." "He's careful." Ted crossed to the office door. Not careful enough? The office was a shrine to Ronnie's ego. Certificates on the walls, most from unaccredited institutions. A heavy desk dominated the room, its surface cluttered with papers and electronics. "He'll be back soon." Linda hovered in the doorway. "Maybe we should, then leave." Ted's voice was cold as he began searching the desk drawers. "You don't want to be here for this. What are you going to do?" "Better you don't know." He found what he was looking for: 3 external hard drives in the bottom drawer. "Get out of here. Go to this address." He handed her a piece of paper. "It's a safe house. Someone will meet you." Linda stared at the paper. "Ted, I don't." He finally looked at her. "This isn't forgiveness. This isn't reconciliation. This is justice. Nothing more." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I'm sorry. For everything. Sorry doesn't fix what you broke." He turned back to the desk. "Now go." He heard her hesitate, then the sound of her footsteps retreating. The front door opened and closed. Ted continued his search, methodically photographing documents, copying files to a USB drive. The sound of a key in the lock came sooner than expected. "Baby." Ronnie's voice carried through the apartment. "You ready to make things right?" Ted stayed in the office, listening to Ronnie's footsteps, playing hide and seek. Ronnie's voice held an edge of menace. "You know I don't like games, baby. Not unless I'm the one making the rules." The office door swung open. Ronnie filled the frame younger than Ted expected, dressed in an expensive suit that couldn't quite hide his thuggish nature. "Well," Ronnie's face split in a predatory grin. "Look who's here. The ex-husband. Come to play, hero?" "No." Ted leaned against the desk, casual. "Just came to talk." "Talk?" Ronnie laughed. "About what?" "How I'm fucking your wife better than you ever did." "Ex-wife." Ted's voice remained calm. "And no, we're going to talk about consequences." "Consequences?" Ronnie stepped into the office, cracking his knuckles. "Like what happens to old men who break into my home? Like what happens to predators who think they're untouchable?" Ted held up one of the hard drives. "Like what happens when these videos get sent to every law enforcement agency in the state?" The grin slipped from Ronnie's face. "You're bluffing. They're encrypted. Everything's breakable." Ted set the drive down. "But that's not your biggest problem right now." "No." Ronnie moved closer, trying to use his height advantage. "What's my biggest problem?" "Me." Ted's voice was deadly quiet. "See, Linda might be weak. Might be stupid enough to fall for your act. But I'm not Linda. You threatening me? Old man? Just explaining how things are going to work." Ted straightened up. "You're going to disappear. Leave the state. Never contact Linda again. Never come back." Ronnie laughed again, but there was uncertainty in his eyes. "Or what?" "Or every dirty secret you've buried comes to light. Every deal, every scam, every video. And trust me, your friends in the police department, the DA's office, they'll run for cover the moment the spotlight hits them. You don't know what you're dealing with." Ronnie's voice dropped to a growl. "No." Ted smiled, a cold expression that didn't reach his eyes. "You don't know what you're dealing with." I've got nothing left to lose. Nothing to protect. Nothing to fear. Can you say the same? Ronnie moved fast, swinging a meaty fist at Ted's face. But Ted was ready. He stepped inside the punch, driving his own fist into Ronnie's solar plexus. The younger man doubled over, gasping, "That's assault." Ronnie wheezed. "Got witnesses." "Cameras." "No witnesses." Ted's voice was conversational as he delivered another precise strike. "No cameras. Just consequences." The fight was brief, but brutal. Ronnie had size and youth, but Ted had cold determination and decades of bottled rage. When it was over, Ronnie lay curled on his office floor, blood leaking from his nose. "Here's what happens next." Ted straightened his jacket. "You have 24 hours to disappear. After that, everything I found goes public." "Everything." "You can't." "I can." Ted cut him off. "I will. Test me and find out exactly how far I'll go." He picked up the hard drives and USB stick. 24 hours, Ronnie. Tick-tock. At the door, Ted paused. "Oh, and if you ever touch another woman like you touched Linda? If I ever hear your name connected to anything like this again?" He turned, meeting Ronnie's hate-filled gaze. "I'll find you. And this will feel like a warm-up." Ted walked out of the apartment, past the still-distracted security guard, into the bright morning sun. His knuckles ached, but the rest of him felt not better exactly, but settled, like justice had been served. Even if it wasn't the legal kind, his phone buzzed a message from the safe house confirming Linda's arrival. Ted deleted it without responding. His part in this was done. Linda would have to rebuild her life on her own, just as he had rebuilt his that as he drove away. Ted caught a glimpse of his reflection in the rearview mirror. The man Linda married might be dead, but something stronger had taken his place. Something that understood that sometimes justice needed a helping hand. Something that would never again let evil go unpunished, let Ronnie run. Let him hide. The fear would follow him, and that was a kind of justice too. A month after the confrontation with Ronnie, Ted sat in Dr. Reynolds' office, watching rain streak down the windows. The bruises on his knuckles had faded, but the memory remained sharp. "You seem different today," Dr. Reynolds observed, her pen poised over her notepad. "More settled." "Do I?" Ted kept his gaze on the rain. "Maybe I just finally accepted things as they are." "And how are they?" "Finished." He turned to meet her eyes. "The house sold last week. Divorce is final. Linda's." He paused. "Gone." "Gone where?" "Don't know. Don't care." The lie came easily. He knew exactly where she was. The safe house had relocated her to another state with a new identity and support system. But that knowledge wasn't comfort. It was just information. "Mark mentioned you had some kind of confrontation. Want to talk about it?" Ted's laugh held no humor. "Mark talks too much. He's worried about you." "Nothing to worry about." Ted stood, pacing to the window. "Sometimes justice needs a push. That's all." "Is that what it was?" "Justice. What else would you call it?" He turned back to her. "When the system fails, when predators hide behind connections and money, what's left except taking matters into your own hands? That sounds dangerous." "Life's dangerous." Ted's voice hardened. "Ask Linda." Dr. Reynolds set down her pen. "You helped her, despite everything she did to you?" "No." Ted's response was immediate. "I stopped someone who thought he was above consequences. Linda was just collateral. You could have walked away." "Could I?" Ted returned to his seat. "Let him keep hurting her? Keep filming her? Keep forcing her to—" He stopped, jaw clenching. "The man I married wouldn't let anyone suffer like this." Dr. Reynolds quoted from his previous session. "That's what Linda said to you. The man she married is dead." Ted's voice was flat. "She killed him. Then who helped her?" Ted was quiet for a long moment. "Someone stronger. Someone who understands that justice and forgiveness aren't the same thing." The session ended, and Ted drove home through the rain. His phone rang. "Mark, heard anything?" his friend asked without preamble. "About?" "You know what about?" "Ronnie. Linda." Ted pulled into his apartment's parking garage. "Ronnie's gone. Crossed the border into Mexico last week. Won't be back." "You sure about that?" "Very." Ted's voice left no room for doubt. Amazing what people will do when properly motivated. "And Linda?" Not my concern anymore. Mark sighed. Ted, don't. Ted cut him off. Everything that needed to be done is done. Leave it there. He ended the call and took the elevator to his apartment. The space felt different now, not just new, but truly his. No ghosts lingering in the corners. No memories haunting the rooms. His phone buzzed with a text from an unfamiliar number. He's really gone? For good. Ted recognized the burner phone number the safe house had given Linda. He typed back, yes. Don't contact me again. I won't. Thank you. For everything. Ted deleted the message without responding. Let her think what she wanted. His actions hadn't been for her. They'd been for justice, for consequences, for the principle that no one should think themselves above the law. The doorbell rang. Ted opened it to find Karen from next door, holding another container of food. Still making too much pasta? He asked. She smiled. Actually, it's lasagna this time. And yes, still too much. Ted studied her for a moment. She was attractive, intelligent, and clearly interested. Under different circumstances. Thanks, he said, taking the container. But I'm not what you're looking for. How do you know what I'm looking for? Because I'm not looking for anything. He met her gaze directly. And that wouldn't be fair to you. Understanding flickered across her face. The divorce? Among other things, she nodded slowly. Well, if you ever change your mind about that pasta, you'll be the first to know. They both knew he wouldn't. After she left, Ted sat at his kitchen counter, staring at the container of lasagna. Dr. Reynolds would say he was isolating himself, avoiding opportunities for connection. Maybe she was right. But the thought of trusting someone again, of being vulnerable. His phone buzzed another text from Linda's burner phone. I know you don't want to hear this, but I'm sorry. For everything. I'll never forgive myself for what I did to us. Ted's thumb hovered over the block button. Instead, he typed, good. Neither will I. He blocked the number before she could respond. Let her live with her guilt. Let her rebuild her life somewhere else, with someone else. His life was here, in this apartment, in this city where he'd rebuilt himself into someone stronger. Someone who understood that some bridges, once burned, should stay ashes. The rain continued outside, washing the city clean. Ted opened his laptop and began reviewing work proposals. Life went on. Justice had been served. Everything else was just details. The knock came at midnight, soft but insistent. Ted muted the television and waited, hoping whoever it was would give up and leave. Another knock, more desperate this time. He checked the security camera feed on his phone and froze. Linda stood in the hallway, looking even worse than the last time he'd seen her. Her clothes hung loose on her frame, her hair lank and unwashed. The knocking came again. Please, Ted. I know you're in there. I can see the light under the door. Ted considered ignoring her, letting her stand there until she gave up. Instead, he found himself walking to the door, anger rising with each step. He opened it just enough to see her face. What happened to don't contact me again? Linda's eyes were red-rimmed, desperate. I didn't know where else to go. The safe house. I couldn't stay there anymore. Too many rules, too many questions. Not my problem. Ted started to close the door. Please. She jammed her foot in the gap. Just listen. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. You're out of minutes, Linda. About 8 months out. I have nowhere else to go. Her voice cracked. No money, no home, no one to turn to. Please, Ted. I know I don't deserve your help, but you're right. He cut her off. You don't deserve my help. You don't deserve anything from me. I know that. The words burst from her like a dam breaking. Don't you think I know that? I destroyed everything good in my life for a man who turned out to be a monster. I betrayed the only person who ever truly loved me. I've lost everything. A door opened down the hall. Karen, peering out at the commotion. Ted grabbed Linda's arm and pulled her inside, shutting the door before they could attract more attention. 5 minutes, he said, releasing her arm. Then you leave. Linda stood in his living room, arms wrapped around herself. Her eyes darted around the space, taking in the new furniture, the abstract art on the walls, a life rebuilt without her. You look good, she said softly. The apartment, everything. You've done well. For minutes. She flinched at his tone. I tried starting over. Got a job waiting tables in another state. But I kept seeing him everywhere. In every customer, every shadow. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. The safe house as counselors. They wanted me to talk about everything. Linda's voice shook. All the details. What he did to me. What he made me do. I can't. So you ran? Ted's voice held no sympathy. Just like you ran to Ronnie. Just like you tried to run from our marriage instead of ending it cleanly. That's not fair. Fair? Ted laughed harshly. You want to talk about fair? Was it fair when you told me you loved another man? When you suggested I share you like some kind of timeshare property? When you destroyed 20 years of marriage for 3 months with a sadistic abuser? Linda crumpled onto his couch, tears flowing freely now. I know. God, I know. I was stupid and selfish and blind. But please, Ted, I have no one else. And whose fault is that? Ted remained standing, looking down at her. You had family, friends, a husband who loved you. You threw it all away. I'll do anything, she whispered. Give up all claims to everything. Sign whatever you want. Just help me start over. Please. Ted studied her, seeing not the broken woman before him, but the wife who had betrayed him, who had tried to rationalize her infidelity as some kind of progressive arrangement. You want to start over? His voice was cold. Fine. Here's the truth. You brought this on yourself. Every choice, every consequence, they're all yours. I forgave you long ago, but I'll never let you back into my life. Ted, please. No. He cut her off. You don't get to beg. You don't get to cry. You don't get to play the victim. Not with me. Linda rose unsteadily to her feet. What am I supposed to do? Go find someone else to fix you? Ted walked to the door and opened it. Your 5 minutes are up. I'll sleep in my car, she said, a last desperate attempt. I have nowhere else. The safe house will take you back. Or don't go back. Your choice, your consequences. He gestured to the open door. Either way, you're leaving. Linda stood there, tears streaming down her face. The man I married is dead. Ted's voice was final. You killed him. Now deal with the consequences. She walked to the door, then turned for one last attempt. I still love you, Ted. Part of me always will. Get out. The words carried such cold finality that Linda stumbled back. She gave him one last pleading look, then walked away, her footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. Ted closed the door and leaned against it, listening until her footsteps faded completely. Only then did he allow himself to breathe, to feel the weight of what had just happened. His phone buzzed. Mark. Linda's back in town, his friend said without preamble. Maria saw her at the grocery store. I know. Ted walked to his window, watching the street below. She just left. Left where? Here. She showed up at my door. Mark swore softly. What does she want? What they always want. Ted watched as Linda's small figure emerged from the building, heading toward a beat-up car parked across the street. A second chance. A way to undo their mistakes. And nothing. Ted turned away from the window. Some things can't be undone. Some bridges stay burned. She's really messed up, Ted. Maria said she looked terrible. Not my problem anymore. Ted's voice was firm. She made her choices. Now she lives with them. He ended the call before Mark could argue further. Outside, Linda's car started and pulled away from the curb, disappearing into the night. Let her go. Let her find her own way. He had his life now, rebuilt from the ashes of her betrayal. Some would call him cruel. Unforgiving. Let them. They hadn't lived through her betrayal, hadn't felt their world crumble because of her selfish choices. He had earned his hardness, his coldness. The night stretched before him, empty of Linda's tears and pleas. Tomorrow would be another day of work, of moving forward, of living the life he had built for himself. Alone but strong, unforgiving but free. The week after Linda's midnight visit, Ted found himself working late at the office. The city lights spread out below his window like fallen stars, each one representing a life, a story, a set of choices and consequences. His phone lit up with a message from Mark. You need to see this. Attached was a link to a local news article. Ted clicked it, feeling a familiar coldness settle in his chest as he read. Linda had been found unconscious in her car outside a motel on the edge of town. Alcohol poisoning. They'd taken her to Memorial Hospital. Ted set the phone down and turned back to his work. 5 minutes later, it rang. "Did you see my message?" Mark's voice was tense. "Yes." "And?" Ted continued typing. "And nothing. Not my problem." "Jesus, Ted." Mark's frustration carried through the line. "She could have died. Her choice. Her consequences. You really are a cold bastard now, aren't you?" Ted stopped typing. "No, Mark. I'm just done pretending her problems are my responsibility." "No one's saying that. But maybe." "She chose Ronnie." Ted cut him off. "She chose to destroy our marriage. She chose to leave the safe house. She chose to drink herself unconscious. Every step, every decision, they were all hers. The Ted I knew is dead." Ted's voice was final. "We've been over this." Silence stretched between them. Finally, Mark sighed. "Maria's going to visit her. Make sure she's okay. Your wife's choice." Ted turned back to his computer. "Like this is mine?" He ended the call and tried to focus on work, but the words blurred before him. With a curse, he grabbed his keys and headed for his car. Not to the hospital, never there, but somewhere he could think the night air was cool as he drove through the city. He found himself at the park where he'd spent that first morning after Linda's confession, watching the duck pond and trying to make sense of a shattered world. The pond was empty now, the ducks long since migrated south. Ted sat on the familiar bench, remembering how raw the pain had been then. Now he felt nothing. Not satisfaction at Linda's suffering, not pity for her situation. Just a vast emptiness where their marriage used to be. His phone buzzed again, an unknown number. "Mr. Harrison?" A woman's voice, professional. "This is Nurse Reynolds at Memorial Hospital. You're listed as Mrs. Harrison's emergency contact." "Not anymore." Ted's voice was flat. "We're divorced." "I see." The nurse paused. "Well, she's asking for you. She's quite distressed, and we thought, remove me from her contacts." Ted cut her off. "I'm not responsible for her anymore." He ended the call before she could respond. Let Linda find her own way out of this mess. He'd already done more than she deserved, saving her from Ronnie. Anything more would just enable her self-destructive patterns. The next morning, Ted arrived at his office to find Maria waiting. "Before you say anything," she held up a hand. "I'm not here to change your mind. Just to give you information." Ted sat behind his desk. "Go ahead." "She's being transferred to a rehabilitation facility." Maria's voice was neutral. 30-day program. "They're also getting her counseling for the trauma from Ronnie." "Good for her." "She asked about you." Ted kept his expression blank. And I told her to stop." Maria met his gaze steadily. "Told her she lost the right to your concern when she betrayed you. That she needs to focus on fixing herself instead of looking for someone else to fix her." Something in Ted's chest loosened slightly. "Thank you." "Don't thank me." Maria stood. "I'm not doing it for you. Or for her. I'm doing it because it's the truth." After she left, Ted sat for a long time, staring at nothing. Finally, he opened his laptop and typed out an email to his lawyer. "Remove my name from all of Linda's emergency contacts and legal documents. I want no further connection." The response came quickly. "Already done. Clean break. Clean break." The words echoed in Ted's mind. That's what this was: cauterizing a wound, ensuring it could never be reopened. Linda would have to find her own path now, her own healing, her own redemption. 2 weeks later, Ted sat in Dr. Reynolds' office for his final session. "You seem at peace," she observed. "Not peace exactly." Ted considered his words carefully. "Acceptance, maybe. Understanding that some things can't be fixed. Some betrayals run too deep. And Linda's recovery is her journey." Ted's voice was firm. "Not mine." Dr. Reynolds nodded slowly. "You know, most people would say forgiveness is part of healing. I have forgiven her." Ted met her gaze. "But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. Doesn't mean letting someone back into your life to hurt you again. And that's your final word on the matter?" "It is." Ted stood. "Thank you for your help, doctor. But I think we're done here." That evening, Ted stood at his apartment window, watching the sunset paint the city in shades of gold and shadow. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Linda's latest attempt to contact him. "The rehab program is helping. I'm starting to understand why I made the choices I did." Still wish I could undo the damage. That Ted read the message twice, then typed his response. Some things can't be undone. Focus on your recovery. Find someone else to fix you. He blocked the number before she could respond, then deleted the conversation. Let her heal. Let her rebuild. Let her find whatever peace she could. His own peace had come from accepting that some bridges, once burned, should remain ashes. The sun sank below the horizon, darkness creeping across the city. Ted turned away from the window and picked up his keys. He had dinner plans with Mark and Maria, a new client meeting tomorrow, a life that moved forward without looking back. Linda would have to find her own way now. Her choices, her consequences, her journey. Ted had his own path to walk, one that led away from the ashes of their marriage toward a future built on stronger foundations. Some would call him cold, unforgiving. But Ted knew the truth. True strength lay not in forgiveness that enabled further harm, but in the courage to walk away and never look back. He had found that strength in the crucible of betrayal, emerged harder, but unbroken. Let Linda find her own strength now. Let her build her own life from the wreckage of her choices. Ted's life was his own, built from the ashes of betrayal into something stronger, something untouchable. The night stretched before him, full of possibilities that had nothing to do with the past. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to move forward alone but strong, unforgiving but free.
Story 4.
Hey, who's that handsome guy? Both Cindy's husband Jim and their friend Barbara were taken aback by her question, even before they stepped through the backyard gate. Barbara followed Cindy's gaze and spotted a friend of Adam, Cindy's brother-in-law. Just so you know, I'm right here, Jim reminded his wife. What, can't I admire a good-looking guy when I see one? She retorted. Well, if you're going to check out some guy, I'd prefer if you kept it to yourself, Jim responded a bit bluntly before shifting his focus to their host. Hi, Barb. Sorry about that. Barbara and her husband, Tony, were hosting an outdoor birthday party for their daughter, who had just turned 13. Barbara saw them approaching, but hadn't greeted them yet. She chose to overlook Cindy's question. No worries, you two. Come on in, she said, still holding the gate. Where should these go? Jim asked, holding up a case of beer. There are a few coolers by the tree filled with ice, Jim. Some have soft drinks for the kids, but the others are for the beer. Just pick an empty one. Gifts go on that table over there, she directed Cindy, who was carrying a nicely wrapped box. Tony, the co-host, spotted them and came over to welcome them. Hey, welcome, you two, he said, kissing Cindy on the cheek. Jimbo, let me take that. As he reached for the case, Cindy made another attempt. Hey, Tony, who's the handsome guy sitting over there with your brother? Tony, a bit slow to catch on and unaware of the previous conversation, looked where Cindy had gestured. Oh, his name's Bob something. He works construction with Adam. Why, do you know him? No, but I wouldn't mind, she replied. I mean, what a hunk. Tony glanced at Jim, surprised. Not fully understanding the situation, he tried to lighten the mood. Watch out, Jim. Sounds like she's on the prowl, he joked. Jim was just as surprised. It seemed like his wife was trying to make him jealous for some reason, but he didn't want to ruin the party, so he chuckled it off and forced a smile. Yeah, sounds like she's ready to trade me in for a younger guy. That'll be the day, Barbara quipped, giving Jim's arm a playful slap. Well, come on in, you guys, Tony said. Barb, why don't you show Cindy where to put the gifts? When Barbara saw the expression on her husband's face, she understood exactly what he was implying. He hoped she would inquire about Cindy's behavior. En route to the gifts table, she lowered her voice to ensure no one else could overhear. Okay, Cin, what's happening? Did you and Jim have an argument or something? What do you mean? Don't give me that. We've all been friends for a long time, and I've never heard you speak like that in front of Jim. Something's up. I'm just giving him a taste of his own medicine. He's out all day, flirting with every pretty girl he sees. You know Linda Kingston? Yeah. She saw Jim in a restaurant a few days ago. He obviously didn't notice her. She told me the waitress came over and kissed him. They talked and laughed through lunch, flirting the whole time. Cindy, Jim's a friendly, outgoing guy. That's just his personality. Having a girl kiss you is more than being friendly, Barb. It's crossing a line, and you know it. Tony kissed you on the cheek a minute ago. That's different. We've been friends for years. This is some waitress he flirts with when he goes there. I don't like it, and it definitely doesn't pass the wife test. The wife test? Yeah, you know, guys use it all the time, but for them, it's the husband test. A wife shouldn't do anything in public or private that she wouldn't do in front of her husband. Well, what's good for the goose, as they say. So, you chose my daughter's birthday party to give Jim a hard time? Don't worry, I won't do anything drastic. I wasn't even thinking about it until I saw Adam's friend over there. He's perfect. I just want to teach Jim a lesson. Well, do me a favor and don't start any fights, okay? I won't. Besides, look at that guy. He's built like a tank. Jim would be crazy to mess with him. All right. I see more guests coming up the walk, so I have to go do my meet and greet thing. I'll catch up with you later. Remember, no fights, okay? No fights, Barb, I promise. She glanced around and spotted Jennifer, the guest of honor, chatting with her friends. She decided to go over and wish her a happy birthday. Jim had just finished helping Tony with the beer and had the same idea. They both arrived at the same time. Cindy spoke first. Congrats, honey. You're officially a teenager. You can really give your parents a hard time now, she joked. That goes for me too, Jen, Jim added. The congrats part, I mean. I'm not sure about the giving your folks a hard time part, he teased. Jennifer laughed at Jim's joke. It was well known in their circle that she'd had a crush on him since she was a toddler. Thanks, she replied while giving Cindy a hug and Jim a kiss on the cheek. These are my friends, Coral, Kathy, and Debbie, she introduced. They chatted with Jen and her friends briefly, but Cindy was eager to proceed with her plan to teach Jim a lesson. Hey, sweetie, she addressed the birthday girl. I'm going to go say hi to your uncle. Catch you later. Jim was about to accompany her when he noticed Tony signaling to him. As Cindy began to walk away, he remarked, Behave yourself. She shot him a wicked glance. Approaching Tony, who was still by the coolers, Jim inquired, What's up, buddy? Just wanted to give you a heads up, Barb talked to Cindy. Seems like you've been flirting with some waitress. Cindy caught wind of it and has this idea to teach you a lesson. I'm guessing that's what all this hunk talk is about. Jim pondered for a moment. I have no idea what she's talking about. I haven't flirted with any waitress that I'm aware of. Did she mention where or who supposedly saw me? I'm not sure, she didn't specify, but I think she's planning to use Bob to make you jealous, so try to stay cool, okay? Meanwhile, as Tony and Jim conversed, Cindy approached her target. Hi, Adam. Hey, Cindy, how's it going? All right, I guess. Who's your handsome friend? Adam was taken aback while his friend stood and introduced himself. Hi, I'm Bob. I assume you were talking about me, right? He said with a charming grin. Who else? She replied. Hey, Cindy, Adam interjected. Where's Jim? He's over there chatting with your brother. I'd love one of those, she said, pointing to the beer Bob held. Hey, Adam, why don't you be a gentleman and grab the lady a beer while we get to know each other better? Not wanting to be rude, Adam obliged. As soon as he headed for the coolers, Bob offered Cindy his now vacant seat. As she sat down, she glanced over to see her husband glaring at her. Seeing his reaction only fueled her confidence that her plan was working. She turned to engage in conversation with her new acquaintance. Meanwhile, when Adam reached the coolers, he approached Tony and Jim. Hey, what's up with Cindy? Why, what happened? Jim inquired. She's cozying up to Bob over there. Who's he, anyway? He works with me. We're on that big high-rise downtown. I've known him about 6 months. Seems all right, but he's a bit of a ladies' man, and I wouldn't trust him around women. He didn't bring a date? Jim asked. Nah, it was sort of a last-minute thing. He was supposed to play golf today. We got off work last night around 5, and he got a text canceling. Started complaining about having nothing to do today, so I invited him to the party. At least Jim now understood what his wife was up to, though he wasn't sure how to handle it. He knew Cindy well. Once she got an idea in her head, she wouldn't let it go until she made her point. Ignoring her might push her further, but confronting her might provoke Bob. He aimed to avoid that scenario at all costs. Adam, do me a favor, will you? Just keep an eye on things. Let me know if it starts to get out of hand. Adam acknowledged Jim's instructions and grabbed a cold beer from the cooler before returning to where Bob and Cindy were engaged in conversation. Handing Cindy her beer and pulling up another chair, Adam felt it was time to interject, hoping Bob would catch the hint. He mentioned having seen the pictures Jim took of the lumberyard fire and praised his talent, wondering if Jim planned to enter the press photographers contest again that year. Though slightly annoyed by the interruption, Cindy politely replied that she assumed Jim would participate. She then informed Bob that her husband worked as a photographer for The Tribute and had won several awards at a state contest for press photographers the previous year. Bob responded with a hint of disdain, acknowledging Jim's presence across the room. Cindy confirmed it was indeed Jim, a response delivered with a dismissive tone that didn't go unnoticed by Bob or Adam. Bob shifted the conversation, expressing his enjoyment of working with his hands and constructing enduring structures. He then directed a question to Adam, asking for validation, to which Adam could only respond with agreement. Assuming Bob had effectively shut down the conversation about her husband, Cindy immediately resumed chatting with Bob, essentially excluding Adam from the discussion. He felt foolish. He'd heard Bob use that same line about working with his hands on women in bars before. It always seemed to impress them, and here Adam had unwittingly given Bob an opportunity. Feeling he was doing more damage than good, Adam excused himself to wish his niece happy birthday for what felt like the 20th time. Jim circulated, mingling with the others while closely observing Cindy and her companion. Although none of the men mentioned his wife's interaction with another man, the women began to gossip. Jim overheard Jenny discussing the situation with her friends, mentioning that the man Cindy was with worked as a newspaper photographer. She added that her dad commented on how photographers often find themselves in various challenging situations due to their job. Jenny expressed surprise that Jim hadn't intervened physically. Jim chuckled to himself. It wasn't really Bob's fault after all, it was his wife's. And as frustrated as he sometimes felt, he'd never resort to violence against her or any other woman. Glancing over, he noticed an empty beer bottle next to Cindy's chair, and another in her hand already. She tended to drink more when she was nervous. This wasn't good. Bob had 3 empty bottles beside his chair. Just then, Tony mentioned that everyone seemed to be getting hungry as he stood by the grill. Jim, preoccupied with Cindy, hadn't even noticed the enticing aroma of grilling meat. Tony then announced the food options available, including burgers, brats, and chicken patties, along with various sides on the nearby table for everyone to help themselves. Jim thought it might be a good opportunity to separate Bob from his wife. Perhaps they could find a quiet corner to eat, and he could learn more about this person he was supposedly flirting with. As he turned toward them, he saw the potential lovebirds setting their beers down beside their chairs and standing up. Apparently, Bob had decided that Cindy was his for the day and possessively took her by the elbow. "Not happening," Jim muttered to himself. He quickly walked over. "Excuse me, could you remove your hand from my wife?" Bob immediately released Cindy's arm and raised both hands in a conciliatory gesture. "Sorry," he half chuckled. "We were just heading to get some food." "Yeah, well, I can handle it from here, thanks," Jim retorted angrily. He grasped Cindy's other elbow and led her over to the food table. "What's gotten into you?" Cindy questioned. "That was incredibly rude." Ignoring his wife's remark, Jim guided her in front of him as they joined the food line. "Grab some food," he stated flatly. "You and I are going to have a talk over by the shed while we eat." Observing the confrontation between Jim and Bob, Adam seized the chance to speak to his colleague, now alone for the first time in a while. "What are you doing?" he asked, irritated. "She's married to one of my brother's closest friends. Leave her alone." "Hey, man, you should be telling her to leave me alone. She's the one hitting on me. I'm just being polite." "Polite, my foot. Seriously, Bob, cut it out. Look, if you think you stand a chance with her, forget it. She's using you to get back at Jim over some waitress. Stay out of it. Listen, married or not, I've never turned down a beautiful woman like that in my life. I know women, and I think you're mistaken about her using me. She's genuinely interested, I can tell. I think you should leave. This is my niece's birthday party, and I don't want any trouble." All right, I'll back off. If she approaches me again, I'll send her right back to her husband, all right? If you don't, you're out of here, Bob. I mean it." "Scout's honor," he responded, holding up the Boy Scout salute. "Now, can I go get something to eat?" "Yeah, go ahead." Cindy wasn't particularly bothered by Jim stepping in between her and Bob. They had only known each other for a few hours, yet he was already becoming overly familiar, not to mention the suggestive comments he was making, although it amused her to see how easily she could manipulate a man like that when she wanted to. Still, she could sense from the way Jim had taken hold of her arm that she had pushed her husband as far as she should. She had promised Barbara no drama, and Jim had proven he wasn't intimidated by Bob's physique. She needed to spend the rest of the day with her husband. She just hoped he had learned his lesson. They both filled their plates with food, and Jim gestured toward the shed away from the crowd. When they found a quiet spot, he handed Cindy his plate. "Here, hold this while I fetch a couple of chairs. I'll be right back." Despite his anger, Jim remained a gentleman, holding the back of her chair as Cindy sat down. He pulled his own chair alongside so they could talk privately. After a few bites, Jim couldn't contain himself any longer, as he was always direct. He questioned Cindy about the talk regarding him flirting with a waitress, expressing his dislike for such games. Cindy responded by saying she wasn't certain about the exact details, but that it supposedly occurred sometime last week. Jim remarked sarcastically about the vagueness of the information. Cindy then suggested that Jim might have a better understanding of the situation than she did, questioning if he flirts with every waitress. Surprised, Jim interjected, asking if he was told he kissed them. Cindy confirmed this, leading Jim to assert that there were only two possibilities. Either it was a mix-up or someone was feeding her lies, as he had only kissed Cindy since they started dating. Cindy gazed into his eyes. Though she usually felt she could gauge his honesty through his gaze, she wasn't entirely sure, as he had never lied to her as far as she knew. Why would someone claim they saw you kissing a waitress if it wasn't true? Beats me, he shrugged, taking another bite from his burger. Since she's your friend, ask her. How do you know it's a woman? It better be a woman. If a male friend told you he saw me kissing a waitress, then you've got your answer. Initially, Cindy entertained the thought that he might have seen her friend in the restaurant and kissed the waitress anyway, disregarding the potential consequences. But she wasn't sure what he meant by his last statement. What do you mean? If it's a man, I've answered my own question. Simple. If it is a man, he's into you and trying to stir up trouble between us. He's probably hoping to cozy up to you by playing the supportive friend. That's absurd. Is it? Think about it. Was it a man? No. All right, then we're back to square one. You'll have to ask your friend why she's misleading you. An uneasy silence followed as they both finished their lunches. When they were done, Jim had a few parting words. This is Jenny's birthday party, and I won't let it be spoiled by a fight with your friend. So if you keep cozying up to him like you have been, I'll just leave you here and you can find your own way home. Or you can spend the night with Mr. Muscles, but then you won't have a home to come back to. Understand? She was taken aback by his intensity. Jim, calm down. I'm not going home with Bob. I wasn't even considering it. I was just trying to show you what it feels like to have your spouse flirting with someone else, that's all. Well, now you've shown me, so let's end it here. He stood, took his wife's paper plate and empty beer bottle, and walked over to dispose of them. As he turned back, he was relieved to see his wife right by his side. Bob, however, was displeased. He had been sneaking glances at the two of them talking while he sat alone, eating his chicken patty. He had no doubt Cindy was genuinely interested. She was eager for action. However, he also acknowledged the need for discretion. Earlier, he had hoped for an opportunity to slip away with her, perhaps to an upstairs bedroom or his car, but now such plans were off the table. They were being watched. He'd have to postpone indulging his desires, at least for now. Despite their underlying tensions, Jim and Cindy were determined to enjoy the rest of the party. She stuck close to him for the remainder of the day, occasionally drifting off to chat with friends, but always returning to his side. The only other interaction Cindy had with Bob was during the group rendition of Happy Birthday, when everyone gathered around Jenny's cake. Bob took advantage of the moment to sidle up beside her and discreetly touch her backside while everyone sang. Initially, she assumed it was Jim, but when she glanced over, she saw Bob wearing a smug grin on his face. She was stunned by his audacity. Glancing around quickly to check for any observers, she found everyone focused on Jenny. Normally, she would have reacted by slapping him, but she knew it would only stir up trouble, something she desperately wanted to avoid. Besides, she realized it was partly her own fault for encouraging him. If given the chance, she'd apologize to him and make it clear she wasn't interested. He withdrew his hand to join the applause as the birthday girl effortlessly blew out the candles. Jim glanced over when he heard Bob's voice nearby, but saw nothing significant. Certainly, Cindy wasn't about to confess to Jim about Bob's inappropriate behavior during Happy Birthday. Naturally, Bob interpreted her silence as consent. He knew how to manipulate the situation. She had to stay close to her husband to avoid suspicion, but eventually she would need to slip away to use the restroom indoors. Hopefully, he could catch her alone to arrange a meeting. He'd keep a discreet watch. For those aware of the earlier incident, the perceived threat seemed to have passed. Much to their relief, both Bob and Cindy seemed to be on their best behavior, so, with the possible exception of Jim, they all relaxed and let down their guard. Jim, however, had encountered guys like Bob before, men who thought they were irresistible to women, and knew they were rarely dissuaded easily. Just to be cautious, he resolved to continue keeping an eye on the potential troublemaker. The party kicked into high gear after dinner. Tony turned up the outdoor speakers and played background music from Pandora while games were set up. A dartboard was placed on the large oak tree near the shed, and Jenny's friends helped her set up the beanbag toss. Some women gathered card tables for bingo. Jenny and her friends suggested a best-of-3 beanbag game to her parents, Jim and Cindy. Tony warned them about Jenny's skill. Fortunately, the adults won the first game, but the subsequent victories went to the youngsters. After the game, Cindy kissed Jim on the cheek and informed him that she needed to use the restroom and would return shortly. Jim replied that he might challenge Adam to a game of darts. Cindy stopped to chat with friends on her way to the house and was fortunate to find the downstairs restroom unoccupied, so she slipped inside. Adam observed Bob's departure and muttered to himself about it, catching Jim's attention. Jim paused mid-throw and inquired about Adam's comment. Adam clarified that Bob seemed to be leaving without saying goodbye or expressing gratitude for the invitation. Jim turned around and caught a glimpse of Bob exiting through the gate, suggesting that Bob might be upset because Cindy wasn't paying him attention anymore and mentioning that he probably had plans with her. Adam agreed, noting that Bob was skilled at charming women, recounting instances where he had seen Bob leave a bar with attractive women. Jim turned back to the dartboard, taking careful aim, when a thought struck him. How would someone enter the house without being seen? They'd leave through the gate, circle around to the front, and enter that way. Handing the darts to Adam, Jim mentioned that he would be right back before making his way toward the back door. Cindy had finished her business and was touching up her makeup. Upon opening the bathroom door, she was stunned to find Bob standing there. Before she could react, he seized her shoulders and pinned her against the doorframe, forcefully locking their lips together in an instant. Had Jim been a split second later, he would have witnessed his wife forcefully pushing Bob away. However, in that moment, she hesitated as she tried to regain her senses. It was then that Jim caught sight of them. He grabbed Bob's shoulder, pulling him away from Cindy, and with a forceful blow to Bob's solar plexus, sent him stumbling back into the washroom, where he collapsed to one knee, gasping for breath. As Cindy's brain struggled to process the rapid events, she felt overwhelmed. It all happened so quickly. She turned to find her husband, but he was nowhere to be seen. Panicked, she searched in every direction, calling out for Jim, but he was nowhere in sight. Then she heard the sound of a car starting. Rushing to the front door, Cindy watched as their car backed out and drove off, realizing how the situation must have appeared, especially given her previous interactions with Bob. Ignoring Bob, who was still gasping for breath, she dashed out the back door. The first person she encountered was Adam, who was still waiting for Jim's return, unaware of the unfolding drama. "Adam, you have to drive me home, now!" she pleaded, her voice trembling with panic. Confused, Adam looked at her, trying to make sense of the situation. "Cindy, what happened? Where's Jim?" "He left. He caught Bob kissing me and—" "What? Is he hurt?" "No, Bob's still in the house. I'm not sure if he's hurt or not. Jim punched him really hard." Adam couldn't help but smirk. "Jim punched Bob?" Yeah. Please, Adam. I have to get home so I can explain what happened. He was so mad, I'm not sure what he's going to do. I'm afraid he's planning to leave me." "I doubt that, Cindy. He's upset, but I don't think he's that upset. You didn't see him just now." "Cindy, I was the first one here. I doubt I'll be able to get my car out. I'm sure I'm blocked in." "Please, Adam." "All right. Give me a second to tell Tony we're leaving, and I'll see if we can get out of here." After briefing Tony, Adam returned, confirming their predicament. "Cindy, you'll have to call a cab. I can't get out, but you can borrow my car." "Are you serious? Thank you." Grateful and relieved, Cindy hurriedly got into Adam's car, knowing she needed to reach Jim before it was too late. There was only about a foot of space between Adam's car and the garage door. He turned the wheel completely to the right and edged forward until his front bumper gently nudged the door. Then he reversed, turning the wheel the other way until his rear bumper lightly touched the car behind him. He repeated this maneuver several times until he could back out onto his brother's meticulously kept front lawn, leaving only about 2 inches of clearance between his car and the one behind. Throughout the journey, Cindy remained silent, lost in her thoughts. She couldn't shake the image of her husband's enraged expression from her mind. His fury was unlike anything she had seen before, and his physical reaction was unprecedented. As they approached her driveway, anxiety gripped her. She dreaded facing whatever awaited her at home. Soon, they turned into her driveway, with Adam parking behind Jim's car. Adam offered to accompany her inside, but she hesitated briefly before declining, expressing gratitude but insisting that she would handle the situation herself, since she felt responsible for it. Upon exiting the car, she signaled to Adam that she would manage and climbed the porch stairs, each step filled with apprehension. Entering the house, she prepared herself for what she might encounter. Jim was nowhere to be seen, and she worried he might be upstairs packing. Just as she began ascending the stairs to confront him, she heard the coffee grinder. A glimmer of hope flickered within her as she thought, "He's making coffee?" Jim, observing her silently from the kitchen doorway, broke the silence by asking if her lover had brought her home. Cindy clarified to Jim that Bob was not her lover, mentioning that the last time she saw him, he was still on the bathroom floor, struggling to catch his breath. Jim nodded in response, but remained silent, which unsettled Cindy. She had expected some kind of reaction from him, whether it be anger or embarrassment. Since Jim seemed unwilling to speak, Cindy decided to take the initiative. "He caught me off guard, Jim. I wasn't willingly engaging with him. He ambushed me as soon as I opened the door, pushing me against it and kissing me. I didn't see you resisting him. You intervened before I had the chance. I was stunned. It took me a moment to comprehend what was happening, but you struck him before I could push him away." She still wasn't certain if her husband's behavior indicated genuine calmness or if it was merely the quiet before a storm. Throughout their conversation, he remained occupied with his tasks. She almost wished he would express his anger openly. His apparent indifference left her feeling anxious. "Well?" she prompted. "Well what?" he replied, hitting the start button on the coffee maker. "Jim, I've never seen you so angry before. I honestly expected you to be packing your bags when I got home." "Don't tempt me," he growled, his voice rising slightly. "You're damn right I'm angry. That stunt you pulled was immature and disrespectful. The only reason I'm not even more upset is because most people at the party knew what you were doing. But you know what infuriates me more than you making a spectacle of yourself? The fact that you chose to trust one of your shallow friends over me. Have I ever lied to you, huh?" His suppressed anger began to surface. "Have I ever given you a reason to doubt me or be jealous? No, never." She had never heard him refer to her friends as shallow before, but she chose not to address it. "Honey, I know how outgoing you are. I've witnessed it. You can strike up a friendship with anyone in minutes, even women. You may not realize it, but I've seen the way they look at you when you walk away. I know they'd be willing to drop their inhibitions in an instant." "Oh, that's ridiculous. You're making me sound like Brad Pitt or something." The situation was escalating. She needed to diffuse it before it escalated further. "Jim, all I'm saying is that you have a charming personality. People are drawn to you. I just want you to understand that some women interpret that as flirting. They might think you're available, married or not." She hoped she had eased the tension. "So, how does that justify you believing that I go around kissing waitresses and trusting your friend over your husband?" Damn, she thought. She had hoped to avoid that question. Their argument persisted for another 20 minutes without resolution, both refusing to yield on the fundamental issue of trust. Despite their disagreement, neither of them opted to sleep on the couch or in separate rooms, but Cindy sensed that closeness was out of the question. He wasn't in a forgiving mood, and she wasn't willing to degrade herself by attempting to change his mind. The following Tuesday, Jim met Tony for a drink after work. Jim was already seated and had just taken a sip from his beer when his friend arrived, wearing a wide grin. "Yo, Rocky, how's Adrian?" Tony quipped, attempting a Stallone impression. Jim glanced at his friend. "Isn't Rocky the one who talks like that?" "Yeah, but I can't pull off a Burgess Meredith impression, so you'll have to settle for what you get," he chuckled. Taking a seat beside Jim, he ordered a beer. "Seriously, how are things between you two?" "Right now, we're barely on speaking terms. I'm still angry, and she knows it, so she tends to avoid me."
"When are you going to cut her some slack? Most people at the party didn't even realize there was any tension between you two. After you left, some folks were asking about you and Cindy."
"What did you tell them?" "I said something unexpected came up, and you had to leave. Nobody questioned it. They probably assumed you two were eager to get home and, well, you know," Tony chuckled. "Yeah, well, we haven't exactly been eager to get in bed since the party. Speaking of which, what's the deal with Bob? Is he plotting revenge?" "I doubt it. Adam filled me in on what happened before he drove Cindy home. When I went inside, Bob was just getting back on his feet. He mentioned you landed a sucker punch." "I sure did," Jim interjected. "Well, he was talking about getting back at you, but I warned him to steer clear of you. I told him you're the toughest guy around and that I've seen you take down guys twice your size. I even threw in my favorite Bible quote." "You have a favorite Bible quote? I didn't know that." "Sure do. Yeah, though he walks through the valley of the shadow of pass away, he fears no evil, for he's the toughest and meanest SOB in the valley." "That's you." Jim couldn't help but laugh. That's nonsense, and you know it, he retorted. Of course I know it, and you know it, but Bob doesn't. I think I scared him enough to make him think twice before messing with you. Well, I appreciate that, buddy. They both grinned and took another sip of their drinks. You know what really annoys me, Jim began, that she doesn't believe me about not kissing some waitress. Are you absolutely sure you didn't? Maybe just a peck on the cheek or something like that. No, He trailed off, and Tony could tell from his expression that he recalled something. Huh. You did kiss her, didn't you? No, she kissed me, Jim responded. Damn, I know what this is all about. The following day, Cindy was surprised to see Jim walking into her office at work. He immediately informed her that he was taking her to lunch before she could react. Assuming it was his way of apologizing, she expressed gratitude, but mentioned it was a bit early and asked if he could wait about 20 minutes. Jim reassured her, saying there was no need to wait. He had already spoken to her boss, explained the situation as a minor family emergency, and arranged for an extended lunch hour, which her boss agreed to. Jim urged her to come along, and Cindy, feeling apprehensive as she wasn't aware of any family emergencies, followed him to the car. As she got in, Jim held the door for her. She questioned him about their destination and the nature of the family emergency. He didn't directly answer her question, but instructed her to call her friend and get the name of the restaurant where the alleged incident occurred. When she asked why, he simply told her to trust him and mentioned that he believed he had figured something out. Reluctantly, she called her friend and obtained the restaurant's name, DeMars on Homan Avenue. He responded with a smile, commenting on the coincidence that they were headed exactly there. Cindy remained silent, but felt increasingly uneasy. She couldn't fathom why he would want to revisit the scene, except perhaps to confront her. Would he flirt with the waitress in front of her? She knew he wouldn't do that. She decided to wait and see what unfolded. The journey to the restaurant took nearly half an hour, during which Cindy agonized over numerous scenarios. She was almost in tears when they arrived. Jim placed his hand on her back and guided her inside. She knew trouble awaited her the moment they entered. Damn, she muttered quietly. Jim found a booth and had Cindy sit first, then joined her. Well, cuz, looks like you brought your better half today. Cindy blushed with embarrassment. Hi, Marilyn, she greeted their waitress. Hi, Cindy. How did you manage to get my cousin here for a real lunch? And with his wife, no less. Every time I see him, he's in such a hurry he can barely eat, she joked. Jim wasn't about to let Cindy off easily. Cindy seems to think you and I are having a passionate affair, he announced. Cindy waited for the punchline before responding. What? No, Marilyn, that's not true. Cindy turned to her husband. Jim, come on, I made a mistake. I apologize. She faced Marilyn again. A friend told me last week that he kissed a waitress here. I didn't even know you worked here. But we haven't... Last week, Jim interrupted. You gave me a peck on the cheek when I arrived. Oh gosh, Cindy, I didn't mean anything by it. Jim hadn't visited in a while, and it was just a friendly gesture. Marilyn, don't worry about it, Cindy assured her. I understand now. My friend misled me into thinking Jim had a thing with a waitress here. I'll be giving her a piece of my mind later. I'd like to hear that, Jim challenged. Cindy looked at him and accepted the challenge. All right, she said, retrieving her phone from her purse. Both Jim and Marilyn listened in on Cindy's side of the conversation. Hi, Linda. Not too good. You know that waitress who you said was kissing Jim? You know who that was? Jim's cousin? Yeah, his cousin. No, I didn't appreciate you telling me. You made it sound like he was having an affair or something. I don't care what you thought. I don't care if you think you see him screwing somebody in the middle of the floor. From now on, keep your gossip to yourself. Yeah, you too. She almost hurt her finger disconnecting. Jim had a hunch it was Linda stirring up trouble. She frequently made derogatory remarks about her own husband. Cindy was worked up after the call. I truly apologize. To both of you. Jim was right. I should have known better. You have a few more apologies to make when you get home tonight, Jim reminded her. You're going to apologize to Tony, Barbara, and Jenny. What about Bob? You can tell Bob to take a hike. You don't pursue a married woman, no matter how much of a flirt she is. Marilyn was still standing nearby. Who's Bob? She asked. Her boyfriend, Jim joked. Boyfriend? She questioned. Don't listen to him, Marilyn. I made a mistake and he's not done rubbing my nose in it yet. It sounds like you two had quite a weekend, Marilyn observed. Let's just say I'm pretty sure Cindy learned a lesson about trust, Jim replied. Cindy was more than a little embarrassed. Her face flushed as she opened the menu. So, Marilyn, what do you recommend? Later, after dinner, Cindy spent almost an hour on the phone, apologizing to their friends, including Jenny. That night, they both lay undressed in bed. Are you still mad? It depends. On what? On whether you still think I would cheat on you. I never really believed you'd cheat on me. I was worried you might give some woman the wrong impression. I just didn't want you leading her on. He considered her words and remembered how angry he felt watching her flirt with Bob. He'd never admit it, but he did understand her perspective a bit better now. Just as he was about to tell her he forgave her, he felt her hand slide down his body and start tickling his balls. Come on, honey. You can't stay mad at me, she cooed. He decided he might not tell her he forgave her just yet. Her fingers gently wrapped around his manhood and slowly started stroking it up and down. Within seconds, he felt himself getting hard. Jim closed his eyes and let out a small sigh as her long red hair teased his skin. The loving touch of her lips sent shivers down his spine as she kissed the head of his fully engorged friend. Oh, God, he groaned. She already knew she was forgiven, but Cindy wanted to take it to the limit. She swung one leg over his torso and guided him inside her. She closed her eyes as she leaned forward, resting her hands on his tight abs as she moved back and forth, driving him deeper and deeper. Oh, babe, I'm not going to last long, he groaned. Me either, she replied. Moments later, she threw her head back as her body stiffened. That was Jim's cue, and it was right on time as they both surrendered to an intense pleasure. A month later, Cindy and Barbara were having lunch together. You and Jim seem to be getting along. Does he still flirt with waitresses? Not as much, Cindy replied. He's still his friendly self, and I wouldn't have it any other way. I love that about him, but he does seem to pull back now and then. That's all you really wanted, isn't it? Exactly. Barbara had to ask her next question, even though she thought she knew the answer. So, have you heard from Bob lately? No, and I'm a little insulted, to tell you the truth. One punch and he just disappears, the wimp. They both laughed at that.